A young woman stared coldly at the man dying by her hands. The white-haired knight ruthlessly drove her blade forward. The elegant nobleman accepted his brutal death in the rain. A system message confirmed the nullification of their engagement. The tragic scene was merely a stage in a video game. Kim Woo-jin was the lead character model designer for the project. His studio's financial survival depended entirely on the game's success. He spent months working overtime on this specific named villain. The doomed intermediate boss was known as Dekulane. In this route, the villain was murdered by his own fiancée. Woo-jin's co-workers even joked that the character looked exactly like him. Exhausted, the developer decided to test Dekulane's base stats again. The villain was cursed with an utterly terrible personality. The boss was destined to be surrounded by bitter enemies. Feeling pity, Woo-jin gifted the boss a powerful comprehension attribute. He ended up just adding all the attributes that looked good. Suddenly, the game's story writer sent an unexpected message. The stranger told Woo-jin to look outside his office window. A terrifying vortex of lightning swirled in the night sky. Woo-jin stared at the impossible storm in complete disbelief. Demonic skulls shrieked from within the blinding flash of light. Shadowy claws reached out from the void to drag him away. A voice warned him not to ever underestimate Dekulane. The villain was merely hiding his true, overwhelming power. Suddenly, a sharp voice demanded that the sleeping man wake up. Shh! An angry young woman shouted at the bewildered man in bed. The game developer gasped for air as he awakened in a panic. She demanded to know how long he intended to stay cooped up. She threw a stack of papers down and ordered him to get up for his lecture. A week had passed since he woke up in this strange body. He had truly become trapped in the world of his own game. He slipped on a crisp white shirt while gathering his thoughts. He was now living as the villain he had created. He reviewed his character's current statistics. The system displayed his primary mana pool. As a mid-tier boss, he was a villain created solely to die. He examined the documents that the furious maid had left behind. They contained basic magical theories and principles. The woman who threw the papers was his half-sister, Yahello. She clearly did not have a good relationship with him. He also recalled the woman destined to kill him in the future. For now, he needed to focus on his upcoming lecture. The papers were materials for an upcoming university lecture. He had never taught a class in his life. A system prompt appeared, giving him a side quest to complete the lecture. Glowing words floated directly in front of his face. He knew that acquiring store currency would be crucial for his survival, but he was incredibly anxious about teaching real magic. Thankfully, this body possessed a unique attribute called comprehension. He had specifically given the boss this trait during development. He suspected there were hidden effects to the unique grade skill. He walked into a grand walk-in closet to prepare for the day. As he dressed, the elegant noble clothing felt surprisingly comfortable. He also possessed traits for intimidation and aesthetic sense. He found himself easily adapting to his new aristocratic persona. His walk toward his very first lecture felt completely natural. He remembered his past as a completely regular man. He was originally an average game developer from South Korea. The previous Dekulane had been a pathetic, lazy bastard, but he refused to let his guard down in this dangerous world. He stepped into the expensive vehicle and sat down in the back. His nervous assistant hurriedly greeted him from the front seat. As they drove, Dekulane reviewed the thick stack of documents. He realized the papers were just a script for him to read. He realized his timid assistant must have done all the actual work. He coldly complimented Alan for preparing the lecture, so he commanded the assistant to rest until they reached their destination. Dekulane felt physically sick just from offering a simple compliment. Dekulane felt a strange disconnect between his mind and the villain's body. They soon arrived at the prestigious Imperial University. The architecture was incredibly grand and imposing. Students were already gathered inside the massive Roteo Hall. Whispers filled the room as they awaited the legendary professor. Dekulane stepped up to the podium and confidently introduced himself. The students were captivated by his handsome appearance and aura. However, one student glared at him with pure hatred. The silver-haired girl's father had tragically killed himself 3 years ago. Dekulane was the one who had stolen his brilliant magical thesis. She had pledged to avenge her family by destroying the corrupt professor. Ephraim gripped her pen tightly, waiting for him to slip up. She wanted to expose his lies in front of the entire academy. Dekulane silenced the hall and began his lecture on magic theory. He flawlessly explained the origins and attributes of different elements. Thanks to his comprehension trait, he understood the complex concepts instantly. He simply read off the prepared script without any hesitation. The students were mesmerized by his unexpectedly brilliant teaching. He calmly detailed the universal places for storing magical energy. He concluded the lecture by emphasizing the importance of hard work. As he finished reading the script, he noticed a strange final sentence. He calmly asked the quiet hall if there were any questions. Zephyrin suddenly stood up and brought up a mysterious spell found in the dormitories. She demanded to know if the professor could identify its purpose. Deculain remained completely calm in the face of her challenge. He sternly refused to answer a child who lacked basic etiquette. He realized that his comprehension attribute consumed an enormous amount of mana. Zephyrin stubbornly manifested the complex spell right in front of him. Deculain's mana rapidly depleted as his unique attribute analyzed the magic. Before she could finish her challenge, he accurately identified it as barrier magic. He flawlessly explained that it was a bewitchment spell designed to trap them. The entire lecture hall erupted into surprised whispers at his casual brilliance. Zephyrin was completely stunned that he had solved the unknown spell instantly. She had intentionally chosen an incredibly difficult formula to expose him. Zephyrin was frustrated that he had so easily bypassed her trick. After class, her friend praised her for being brave enough to ask. The students were absolutely amazed by the professor's undeniable expertise, but Zephyrin's attempt to expose him as a fraud had completely failed. Zephyrin agreed to submit a joint report on the magical barrier, but internally she seethed over giving Deculain another undeserved victory. Meanwhile, Zephyrin steeled herself for his upcoming classes. She vowed not to waver against the man who destroyed her family. Chapter 4. Cover. Walking back to his office, Deculain admitted the encounter could have gone terribly. Just looking at the student's spell had nearly drained his entire mana pool. As he walked, a familiar voice suddenly called out to him. He turned to see a female knight approaching him. It was Julie, the woman he was currently engaged to. She was a named character destined to become the pinnacle of knighthood. He coldly brushed off her attempts at conversation. Julie confronted him about breaking a promise they had made. Deculain coldly stated that he didn't recall any such promise. She furiously blocked his path to demand an explanation. She asked if he was going to run away like before. Deculain coldly dismissed her and walked away without looking back. He remembered the original Deculain's pathetic attempts to win her over, but the new Deculain simply ordered her to leave him alone. The silver-haired knight watched him go with a hardened expression. Their engagement had been arranged purely for political gain. Julie had accepted the loveless marriage for the good of her household, but she despised him for lying to the world about his magical genius. She couldn't forgive his utter lack of honor and conviction. It was easily the most prestigious magical academy in the empire. He remembered spending countless nights designing this very environment. Suddenly, a frantic student ran directly into his path. A clumsy student violently crashed right into him. He handed over the stack of files and bowed deeply. Deculain instinctively threw out his hand to brace for impact. The clumsy student profusely apologized for the sudden collision. Deculain barely registered the boy's flustered apologies. Back in his office, Deculain reviewed the new mage's sponsorships. The magic tower heavily relied on massive financial investments to function. He carefully scanned the detailed dossiers of the newest applicants. He noticed that Sylvia had a massive amount of financial backing. However, Zephyrin had absolutely zero sponsorships. He knew Zephyrin was destined to become a main character, but in this world, she was his greatest enemy. The professors avoided her out of fear of offending Deculain. She was a dangerous variable that could destroy his future. If he let the story play out naturally, she would inevitably kill him. The nullification of his engagement was the first step to his downfall. A system window warned him of his impending villainous fate. He envisioned the countless ways he could be brutally murdered. To survive, he needed to make completely different choices. He handed the documents back to Alan and prepared to head home. He refused to blindly walk into the traps set by the narrative. He knew that many of his death routes could be avoided with enough money, but wealth alone wouldn't save him from the powerful named characters. He immediately started looking for ways to exploit the game's mechanics. The only true way to survive was to become overwhelmingly strong. He remembered that several hidden hidden magic circles were scattered around the campus. Dekulin tested his ability to manipulate earth and fire elements. He needed overwhelming strength to survive the impending death variables. He refused to die a pathetic death in the rain again. His innate attributes provided him with a unique advantage. His unique Midas Touch attribute allowed him to alter materials. This combination gave him powerful telekinesis over metal objects. He decided to test his capabilities with a basic spellbook. As he activated the spell, magical energy flared around his desk. The fundamental concepts of telekinesis flooded directly into his mind. He instantly memorized the spell without needing to cast it. He considered engraving magic circles directly onto his own body. This dangerous method would drastically increase his magical output. Thankfully, his Iron Man trait would let him survive the immense physical strain. He began the agonizing process of engraving the magic into his flesh. A frightful, bone-crushing pain tore through his entire body. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let out a single groan. The exhausting process nearly drained all of his limited mana. But when the glowing light faded, a magic circle was permanently seared onto his shoulder. A month later, the university held its first outdoor practical lecture. A wooden sign instructed the students to gather elemental materials. Ephraim grumbled about the professor's irresponsible teaching methods. Suddenly, Sylvia bumped roughly into Ephraim's shoulder. Ephraim furiously demanded an apology from the blonde noble. Sylvia coldly looked down at her and refused to apologize. Tensions rose as magical energy began to crackle between them. The surrounding students muttered nervously as the two girls faced off. Ephraim suddenly felt a massive amount of mana being sucked away. Sylvia activated a powerful spell, ignoring the danger to others. Ephraim shouted for her to stop before someone got hurt, but Sylvia's eyes glowed with dangerous, unrestrained power. The other students panicked as the unstable magic spiraled out of control. The conflicting spells collided, creating a blinding flash of green light. The immense pressure violently detonated, tearing up the ground. The shockwave knocked several students off their feet. A terrifying void of dark energy formed at the center of the blast. The unstable vortex began indiscriminately sucking in everything around it. If the void exploded, the metal fragments would shred everyone nearby. Ephraim watched in horror as the destructive energy reached its breaking point. Suddenly, a barrage of glowing blue crystals shot into the vortex. The sharp ice fragments instantly froze the violent explosion in place. Dekulin stood calmly amidst the frozen devastation. He ordered everyone except the two troublemakers to leave immediately. Ephraim realized she was in serious trouble. Shortly after, a disciplinary meeting was convened to judge their actions. Dekulin sat alongside the other high-ranking university professors. The chairwoman demanded to know who was responsible for the dangerous incident. The biased professors were clearly preparing to favor the noble Sylvia. Dekulin realized he needed to intervene to alter the outcome. He had seen the unstable scarlet energy pouring out of Ephraim earlier. His villain's fate attribute had shown him a glimpse of her deadly potential. The chairwoman furiously scolded Ephraim for causing the conflict. Ephraim bit her lip, unable to provide an excuse against the noble's claims. The professors suggested that she should be expelled from the academy. Ephraim bowed her head, overwhelmed by the unfair accusations. She felt completely alone, with no one willing to protect her. Dekulin suddenly spoke up, interrupting the biased committee. He demanded that they listen to his opinion as the head professor. Sylvia looked up in surprise as he began to speak. Dekulin bluntly asked Sylvia if she truly believed she was faultless. He pointed out that her reckless actions had endangered everyone present. He then took the blame himself, stating his lecture setup was flawed. The other professors were stunned by his unexpected defense of a commoner. Dekulin smoothly convinced them to dismiss the incident without any expulsions. As he left the room, Ephraim called out to him. She desperately wanted to ask if he remembered ruining her father's life. Dekulin paused in the grand hallway and listened to her struggling words. He already knew exactly what the grieving girl wanted to ask before she could finish, so he simply told her not to waste her potential on the past. He turned away and continued down the corridor, leaving her behind. Ephraim realized that he did remember her family after all. She shed tears of relief, satisfied that he carried some sense of responsibility. A system message confirmed that Dekulin had successfully overcome a death variable. As he rode back in his car, Dekulin reflected on a memory from 10 years ago. He had been present when Ephraim's incredible magical aptitude was first discovered. The examiners declared that both he and and Ephrine had the potential to become archmages. He realized his noble family had destroyed the Lunas solely to eliminate his competition. They had ruined her father just to ensure Deculain would become the next archmage. He had intentionally set the explosive trap during the lecture just to test her true capabilities. Deculain remembered seeing through Ephrine's plan during the previous lecture. He forced the students to compromise instead of taking credit. He adjusted his glove while walking outside. His car drove away from the manor. He knew supporting Ephrine would remove a future death variable. The girl had been hostile toward him during the class. Sylvia also held a grudge against him. He wanted to avoid social events. A prompt issued a side quest to attend the Flower of the New Year event. He needed more store currency to access his upgrades. His vehicle pulled up to a grand estate. The noble guests bowed as he entered the hall. He locked eyes with a familiar face across the room. He recognized Yahello in the crowd. Yahello was a character he had modeled after himself. The blonde man greeted him with a wide smile. Deculain overheard the name of a famous adventurer. An older noble approached to greet him. Deculain ignored the greeting and kept walking. He scanned the room for the named character. He needed to use this chance to get acquainted with her. Ganesha was a formidable fighter. She was the 5th strongest character in the early stages of the world. He needed to make contact with her tonight. He spotted her by the balcony railing. He walked toward the balcony doors. Someone blocked his path to the terrace. He recognized the interference. Yahello stepped in front of him with a smug expression. The mage asked about his recent academic progress. Yahello taunted him about his stalled research over the past 3 years. The man held a deep grudge out of pure jealousy. Deculain knew the rumors of his incompetence were true. He realized Yahello was just trying to provoke him. He noticed that Ganesha had vanished from her spot. Yahello asked if something was wrong. Deculain cursed the man and told him to step aside. His plan to meet the adventurer had been ruined. Deculain walked away in frustration. He found the adventurer standing alone on the terrace. She smiled and asked if he was searching for her. He was surprised she knew his intentions. She apologized for failing a past commission. He realized their relationship was based on hired work. She was supposed to bring him a child with high magical aptitude. She confessed that she got attached to the kids. Deculain realized his predecessor had tried to use talented children to cheat his research. He asked how long she intended to live like a rogue. He remembered the original boss would have sent assassins. The original Deculain had destroyed the trust of everyone. He hurt countless people to build his fame. Deculain vowed to live a different life. She admitted she expected him to try to kill her. He stated that such an action would be an excessive concern. He knew her invincible attributes made her impossible to defeat. If the original villain had tried, she would have survived. He decided his goal of making connections was fulfilled. He turned his back to leave the terrace. He reminded her that she lacked basic aristocratic manners. The system confirmed he had avoided a death variable. He was surprised by the notification. He realized the previous conversation had been a hidden trap. He decided he could not drop his guard in this environment. Another noble asked how things were going with Deculain. The silver-haired knight flinched at the question. Julie admitted she was worried by the rumors. Her friend agreed that the situation was bad. Deculain walked past their seating area. The other guests gossiped about his departure. They assumed he was having relationship issues with his fiancée. A quest completion window granted him more store currency. A week passed since the social gathering. Deculain spent his time focusing on physical training. He remembered a massive magical backlash. He had suffered severe internal injuries during a test. He had engraved fire control into his body. The process reduced casting time, but was highly dangerous. He developed a strict morning routine to build his endurance. His assistant brought him a sealed document. The letter was from the Magic Tower Qualification Committee. They scheduled an audit hearing regarding his lack of academic progress. The original Deculain had neglected his research for years. He knew this was an unfavorable situation for him. Maintaining his professor title was essential. Losing the position would mean losing all hope of survival. He decided to search the old laboratory. The massive room was in a state of utter ruin. He noticed a strange heap of trash on the floor. He guessed someone had hidden something under the debris. He used his telekinesis to sweep the wreckage aside. An encrypted grimoire sat hidden beneath the rubble. He activated his comprehension attribute to read the text. Blinding golden light erupted from the open pages. The pages contained a brilliant magical theory. However, the pages were torn. The complex logic was flawed in several places. He spotted a broken locket depicting a young Ephrine. He realized her father had been the one conducting this research. The original Deculain had stolen the work and caused the man's death. He gripped the locket. He vowed to complete the equation occasions. He planned to add the man's name as a co-author. Students gathered at a cafe. Ephorine sat with the other commoner students. They discussed forming a club to protect themselves. Ephorine noted they needed a supervising professor. The aristocrats mocked the idea of a commoner club. Ephorine glared at the arrogant students. One student suggested asking Professor Relan. Another pointed out that the man despised commoners. A friend suggested they ask Professor Deculane instead. Ephorine screamed in pure horror at the idea. Ephorine insisted she wanted nothing to do with the villain. Her friends pushed her toward the exit. She protested as they forced the paperwork into her hands. Ephorine shivered with anxiety as she stood outside his office. She found Deculane standing by his desk. She held out the club registration form. He signed the document without hesitation. He handed the paper back to the stunned girl. She stared at the paper in disbelief. Ephorine stared at his signature as she left the room. She wondered why he was treating her with such leniency. She felt a strange dissonance between the rumors and his actions. The next day, Deculane stood before his class. He began a lecture on the fundamental understanding of pure elements. The silver-haired girl watched him with a skeptical glare. He manifested a small flame to demonstrate a basic ignition spell. He explained how adding strokes to a circle altered its properties. He opened a grimoire and levied it with telekinesis. The students watched the floating book in awe. He demonstrated a spell utilizing flowing fire. Sylvia watched the display with wide, fascinated eyes. He conjured a blue water magic circle in his hand. He overlaid a red fire magic circle on top of it. The two elements merged into a swirling vortex of purple energy. The students gasped as the fire flowed like liquid. Sylvia stared at the impossible combination of spells. She realized his theories provided a perfect mold for casting spells. The other students muttered in amazement at his skill. He explained that relying on intuition hindered true growth. He proved his genius through flawless theoretical execution. After class, Ephorine returned to the dorms. She exhaled, and exhausted from focusing so hard on the lesson. She found her door covered in insulting graffiti. The painted words demanded that she leave the academy. Inside, she discovered a pristine envelope waiting on her floor. She considered reporting the false document for a reward. She took the document to the administration office. The receptionist examined the sealed envelope. The staff member confirmed the sponsorship seal was authentic. Ephorine realized she possessed a massive fortune. She beamed with joy at her newfound wealth. She packed an emergency suitcase in a panic. She vowed to work harder and survive the academy. That evening, luxury cars arrived at the Schatzenjevel auction house. Yahello fumed over Deculane's excessive spending habits. She heard he blew 10 million elne just last year. She swore to stop him from wasting more of their funds. Deculane walked down the grand hallway of the auction venue. He wanted to find a better metal to enhance his telekinetic combat. He knew his current wood-steel shards were just a temporary patch. He entered the VIP waiting room and found a silver-haired knight. He had not expected to run into Julie in this place. She turned around with a harsh glare. He asked if she had been well since their last meeting. He asked if she came to scold him over a recent disciplinary incident. She demanded to know if he planned to crush the dreams of rookie mages. She warned him that his past sins would catch up to him. He told her to cancel their engagement if she hated him so much. He refused to marry a woman who harbored such obvious death variables. She wondered why she felt anxious around him. He smirked at her uncharacteristic fluster. He felt a strange surge of emotion from the original Deculane's memories. An announcer declared the start of the auction. The first item was an elegant porcelain vase. Deculane watched the item glow through his specialized eyesight. The golden aura proved the artifact held immense hidden value. He raised his paddle and won the bid for a massive sum. The auctioneer confirmed the sale to guest 777. Deculane checked his bank balance, deciding to invest the rest of his funds. He proceeded to buy every magical artifact that crossed the stage. The audience muttered in shock at his relentless spending. Julie glared at the man wasting money on vanity items. She vowed to win the final prize before he could take it. The snowflare stone was a rare metal that held both heat and cold energies. Deculane knew it was the perfect material for forging weapons. He listened as the bidding war erupted across the room. Julie gripped her chair, eager to win the precious stone. She gasped as the price climbed past surpassed 30 million elna. She looked over at the man driving the price up. Dekulin maintained a calm expression as he placed his bid. The auctioneer called out 33 million elni for guess 777. The other nobles assumed he was buying it to win his fiancée's favor. Dekulin felt the strain on his funds but refused to back down. He secured the stone for 42 million elna. The crowd erupted into applause for the massive purchase. Outside, Dekulin walked toward his waiting car. He told Julie he could buy her anything she wanted. He handed her a box of jewels to prove his point. She felt humiliation at his arrogant display. She demanded to know what he really wanted from her. She declared that she would never love him. He agreed that their relationship was a mistake. She stood frozen as he walked away into the night. Dekulin returned to the Eucline Manor. Yariel stomped down the stairs to confront him. She demanded to know why he had drained the estate's mining funds. She cried in frustration over his reckless gambling. She screamed that he was wasting their parents' legacy. Dekulin felt a sudden surge of aggressive energy from his attributes. His eyes glowed as he suppressed the rising fury. He yelled at her to stop worrying about his actions. Yariel screamed back that he was ruining their family name. He offered to give her the position of household head. She froze, thinking he was playing a cruel joke. He promised to make an official oath to prove his sincerity. She demanded to know if he planned to abandon the family. Dekulin turned his back and ignored her questions. The system awarded him for surviving another dangerous encounter. He walked back to his private study. Ganesha swung down from the ceiling to greet him. She apologized for entering his home uninvited. She noted that Yariel did not share his bloodline. Dekulin already knew his sister was adopted. He warned Ganesha to keep her mouth shut about the family secret. She promised to protect the secret regarding his sister. She informed him that the infamous 6 snake heads had entered the territory. She explained the dangerous criminals were targeting auction winners. She warned him to keep his guard up now that he possessed the snowflare stone. After she left, Dekulin sat alone in his dark office. Meanwhile, Ganesha sat by a campfire with her adventure team. Her teammates teased her for having a soft spot for handsome men. She wondered if Dekulin was still looking for a magic slave. Dekulin received a side quest regarding a disturbance in the magic tower. He opened his system interface to check the store. He wanted to purchase an upgrade for his mana quality. He decided to wait until he gathered enough currency. Alan entered the office carrying a stack of papers. He handed his boss the latest issue of the Wizard Journal. The cover featured a wanted poster for a dangerous wizard killer. Dekulin knew the assassin would provide a chance to earn more currency. He asked Alan if he wanted to become an assistant professor. Alan panicked, convinced he lacked the required talent. Amr Dekulin handed the boy a bangle engraved with the Eucline emblem. He praised Alan for his excellent organizational skills. He gave the assistant cash to buy dinner and ordered him to rest. Dekulin walked down to the staff-only library. He found Sylvia searching through the restricted bookshelves. She was looking for ancient literature to study. She held a rare novel written in the fairy language. He confronted her for trespassing in a restricted area. He warned her that she would face disciplinary measures if she returned without permission. The next morning, the students arrived at the Mountain of Darkness. The dangerous forest served as a practical training ground. Dekulin acted as the on-duty professor for the excursion. He felt an ominous energy pulling him deeper into the woods. Back on campus, Sephirine enjoyed desserts with her friends. She paid for the treats using her new sponsorship money. Footsteps echoed outside the cafe. A terrified student ran past, screaming for help. Ephirine dropped her spoon and rushed outside. She sprinted toward the dark woods at the edge of the campus. She found a girl covered in blood and thorns. A massive claw slashed through the trees above them. Ephirine scrambled backward as a terrifying demon landed on the path. Dekulin stepped out of the shadows to intercept the beast. The demon roared and lunged at the professor. Dekulin raised his hand, commanding the ambient mana. Sharp telekinetic blades sliced through the air. The invisible weapons battered the demon backward. A system prompt warned that his Eucline bloodline was reacting. The lineage trait filled him with immense hostility toward demons. His eyes glowed red as his blades ripped the monster apart. A completion window granted him a store currency reward. He stared down at the dead creature, knowing the true game had begun. Ephirine woke up screaming in a clinic bed. A nurse explained that she had passed out from a demon's bewitchment. The nurse revealed revealed that Professor de Coulin was the one who saved her. She rushed toward the lecture hall to face the professor again. Ephraim arrived late to the academy classroom, panting hard. A friend waved her over to an empty seat near the front. Ephraim claimed she was in prime condition after getting ample sleep. She noticed the strange materials arranged on the desks. The heavy wooden doors of the lecture hall slid open. de Coulin walked into the room alongside a young boy. The professor introduced Alan as his new teaching assistant. The students muttered in absolute surprise at the unprecedented decision. Ephraim stared at the podium in absolute shock. De Coulin silenced the room and announced the topic. He instructed the class to solve the assigned task within 3 hours. Ephraim stared down at the glowing green bracelet on her wrist. The artifact was her deceased father's inheritance. She gritted her teeth, desperate to focus on the assignment. 25 minutes passed before Sylvia announced she was finished. De Coulin praised the blonde noble for her rapid execution. De Coulin reminded the class to focus on precision over speed. Sylvia stood up from her glowing floral creation. Ephraim watched her rival leave with absolute frustration. The silver-haired girl struggled to concentrate on her own task. The sun began to set outside the academy windows. 3 hours passed without any progress for Ephraim. De Coulin dismissed the rest of the class. Ephraim slammed her head onto her desk in despair. She was the sole student who failed to produce a result. She cursed her own lack of skill. The dark night fell over the empty campus. 5 hours and 47 minutes passed in total silence. De Coulin asked how long she intended to make him wait. Ephraim looked up at the looming professor in alarm. He stood over her desk with a harsh gaze. He scolded her for having a breakdown over a basic assignment. He demanded to know why she was wasting her potential. He stated that she needed to remain cold and logical at all times. He reminded her that the person she resented was standing right in front of her. He pointed out her obvious lack of control. He asked if she intended to remain weak. De Coulin turned his back and called her a massive disappointment. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the dark. Ephraim glared at his back with furious tears in her eyes. She slammed her fists onto the table in defiance. The unfairness of the situation burned in her chest. She realized whining would not change her truth. She wiped her face and gathered her remaining materials. She vowed to succeed no matter what it took. She refused to stay a failure in his eyes. She closed her eyes and visualized the magical theory. The magic circle began to spark as she pushed her limits. Ephraim forced her mana into the gathered materials with renewed vigor. The title card marked the end of her bitter failure. The system interface displayed the completion of the trial. Outside, de Coulin admitted the long wait was a necessary cost. He knew the main quest would begin soon. He needed Ephraim to grow strong enough to face the coming evil. He refused to let her growth become a threat to his own survival. Ephraim at last walked out of the academy building. De Coulin watched her leave from the shadows. A system prompt confirmed the completion of his side quest. The extra currency brought him closer to a crucial upgrade. He gained 1 store currency point as a reward. De Coulin turned away to head back to his residence. A loud voice called out to the head professor. Zeit von Bruggen-Frieden approached with a wide grin. The large man was the current head of the Frieden household. He was the one who pushed for De Coulin and Julie's betrothal. Zeit was renowned as a top-tier combatant in the world. De Coulin wondered why such a dangerous figure was seeking him out. The knight mentioned hearing rumors about the couple's strained relationship. He proposed arranging a dinner to mend their ties. De Coulin accepted the invitation without a moment of hesitation. Zeit patted his shoulder in approval of the quick response. The massive man promised to handle all the preparations. De Coulin knew refusing the offer would trigger a fatal variable. But Zeit held his household's reputation above all else. The professor sighed, knowing he could not cancel the appointment. The next day, Julie argued with her brother at the Frieden estate. She voiced her absolute hatred for her fiancé. Zeit asked if she was sulking over the auction incident. She threatened to break the engagement if de Coulin presented a weapon made from her stolen ore. Zeit glared at her outburst. He warned his sister to think with extreme caution. Zeit narrowed his eyes at his stubborn sister. He reminded her of the heavy responsibilities tied to their name. He reminded her that there was no place for emotion in politics. He accused her of carrying feelings for someone else. Veron stepped into the room to interrupt the argument. Julie apologized for showing him a disgraceful side. Veron shook his head. I'm staring at at the floor. The dark-haired knight drew his sword in a solemn pledge. He glared at the door where Zeit had exited. He declared that the professor was unfit for his liege. He offered to eliminate the corrupt professor himself. Julie turned back to face her loyal knight. She demanded that he sheath his weapon at once. Julie ordered her subordinate to stand down. She explained that the elders would investigate any foul play. She refused to drag her subordinates into a political war. Veron lowered his head in silent frustration. She refused to let him dirty his hands for her sake. She turned away with a heavy sigh. Veron remained silent, his grip tightening on his blade. He vowed to find a way to prove his absolute devotion. The system displayed the next chapter title. The title card signaled the start of a new trial. Ayn de Coulin sat alone in his expansive office. He reviewed the ledger of his vast remaining wealth. De Coulin sorted through his auction purchases in his study. The artifacts were potent, but extreme in volatility. He set aside the lesser artifacts for his vault. He locked the container to prevent any accidents. He stared at the glowing frost flame stone on his desk. The rare material resisted his telekinetic manipulation. He realized he needed to undergo a communion process to tame it. He pressed his palm against the smooth crystal surface. He attempted to use his comprehension attribute to analyze the ore. The complex magical formula flooded his mind. Blinding light radiated from his hand as the skill activated. The immense strain caused the artifact to crackle. Sparks of magic flared around the stone. He gripped the edge of his desk to steady himself. The process consumed a massive amount of his mana for a minimal gain. He groaned as his vision blurred from the rapid drain. He realized taming the stone would take at least a year of constant effort. He checked his calendar for his upcoming schedule. He noted the dinner with Zeit was scheduled for that evening. A specific anniversary date was marked in red ink. The sun set over the grand restaurant Von Meschel. De Coulin arrived at the establishment for the arranged dinner. Zeit escorted him into the private dining room. Julie sat at the table in an elegant white dress. Zeit complimented her rare appearance in formal wear. De Coulin acknowledged her undeniable charm in his mind. He prepared himself for the inevitable political maneuvering. He then noticed the dark-haired woman sitting beside her. Josephine Illid smiled from behind a wine glass. The woman was a dangerous sociopath and the owner of a shadow intelligence network. Her protective obsession with Julie made her a massive threat. He noticed the woman's predatory gaze locked onto him. De Coulin felt a murderous aura radiating from the woman. He knew this encounter was an extreme death variable. He decided to confront the issue head-on to survive. He asked Zeit when they should hold the wedding ceremony. Zeit slammed his hand on the table in surprise. Julie gasped in pure shock at the brazen question. De Coulin maintained a calm demeanor despite the tension. De Coulin offered to dissolve the engagement if she lacked faith in their union. He stated he would leave the choice in her hands. And Zeit frowned at the unexpected turn of events. Julie trembled at the abrupt proposition. Zeit protested that the household elders would reject a cancellation. De Coulin requested a private moment with his fiancée. Zeit agreed and left the room with Josephine. Josephine smiled as she followed Zeit out. She waved from the doorway before shutting it. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving the couple isolated. Julie glared at the man sitting across the table. She crossed her arms in defensive anger. She demanded to know what dirty method he planned to use next. She accused him of playing a twisted game with her life. She brought up his past actions of forcing the betrothal. She accused him of blocking her path to the Imperial Order. She reminded him of the rumors he spread to trap her. Oh, she spat that she would rather die than submit to his whims. De Coulin did not deny a single accusation. He accepted the original villain's sins as his own burden. De Coulin listened to her furious grievances in silence. She demanded to know if he was acting on orders. He stated that things had progressed too far to back out now. He explained that their household's interests were too entangled. A sudden break would ruin both of their names. He admitted his own lack of honesty and devotion. He promised to change his approach. He vowed to act as her patron rather than her master. Julie blinked in pure confusion at his declaration. She searched his eyes for any sign of deception. He promised not to force her into a corner anymore. Julie yelled that she would not fall for his lies. De Coulin lowered his gaze, maintaining a solemn expression. He pointed out that her own siblings were pushing the marriage for their reputation. He asked if she believed her household would support a broken engagement. She asked if he was willing to face the backlash of a fake engagement. De Coulin confirmed he would shoulder the blame himself. He offered to maintain the engagement as a shield for her ambitions. He promised to help her achieve her dream of becoming a defender. He urged her to pursue her knighthood without restraint. He promised to step back whenever she was ready to leave. He swore to continue their arrangement but never force a marriage. The heavy tension in the room began to dissipate. Julie stared at him, bewildered by his sudden change in tone. She asked what he expected in return. Deculain asked her to show him a smile once a month. The simple request caught the knight off guard. Julie flushed red in profound embarrassment. She accused him of trying to win her over with cheesy words. She asked if this was another one of his cruel jokes. She looked away, flustered by his gaze. She stuttered over her words, unable to form a coherent reply. Deculain struggled to hold back a smirk of victory. He knew she possessed zero romantic experience. Her hardened exterior crumbled against a simple compliment. Julie assumed his flustered reaction meant his feelings were genuine. Deculain knew Josephine was listening behind the door. He needed to convince the sociopath that his love for Julie was real. The ploy successfully diverted the woman's murderous intent. The system confirmed he had avoided another death variable. 3 days later, Deculain drove out to a quiet location. He drove deep into the outskirts of the capital. He arrived at a remote cemetery at sunset. The setting sun cast long shadows over the graves. He pulled his coat tight against the chill. He scanned the rows of identical markers. He walked down the quiet path between the graves. He stood before a pristine tombstone. The name engraved on the stone belonged to his past. The marker held an Easter egg he had written into the game. He recalled a late-night conversation with his ex-girlfriend, Ara. He remembered her bright smile and endless support. He had used her name as a tribute in his game's code. The line between fiction and reality blurred in his mind. She had suggested adding a tragic backstory for the mid-boss. He placed a fresh bouquet of flowers at the base of the grave. He knelt down, unable to hold back his sorrow. The memory of his lost love pierced his stoic facade. He had used her name for Deculain's deceased fiancé. He whispered an apology to the empty air. He stared at the name engraved in the stone. Deculain touched the cold marker with a trembling hand. He rested his forehead against the solid stone. She had followed him out of sheer curiosity. She crouched lower to avoid being spotted. She listened to his quiet sobs echoing through the cemetery. He remembered the warmth of his past life in the real world. Tears fell from his eyes as the grief of 2 lifetimes merged. Sylvia watched the grieving professor from the bushes. She had come to visit her own mother's grave. She tightened her grip on her own floral bouquet. The blonde girl was mesmerized by the arrogant man's hidden sorrow. The professor's vulnerability shattered her preconceived notions. She retreated, leaving him to mourn in peace. She realized his strictness in class masked a deep inner pain. A few days prior, Deculain had purchased an upgrade for his mana quality. The enhancement shattered a chair with minimal effort. The system confirmed his mana output was now far more efficient. He noticed the upgrade expanded his effective control range. The power surge extended to his physical attributes as well. In the present, a heavy impact shook the ground. Deculain stood over a fallen attacker. He felt a surge of pride at his successful counterattack. He cursed the fact that he couldn't erase the man due to his lack of magic. The downed man screamed insults at the mage. The assassin cursed the corruption of all magic users. The attacker revealed his red eyes, so a marker of the blood shroud race. Deculain realized the man was immune to his magic. Lockhart demanded to know how Deculain had defeated him. He questioned how a mage survived without casting a spell. The assassin was a known mini-boss with absolute magic nullification. Magecraft had been created to eradicate demons. The ensuing war birthed the endless hatred between the 2 factions. This historical conflict fueled the game's core storyline. The Bloodshroud race suffered endless persecution due to their demonic ancestry. They were hunted across the continent for existing. Deculain understood the pain driving the man's vengeance. Deculain expressed pity for the man's tragic history, but he refused to excuse the murder of innocent people. Lockhart roared in pure fury and charged. He refused to accept a lecture from a noble mage. Deculain manifested a glowing net of steel wire. He declared his identity as a noble of the Eucline bloodline. He mocked the assassin for trying to intimidate him. He stood his ground without a single trace of fear. His innate hostility toward demons flared to life. Lockhart froze, overwhelmed by the professor's absolute dignity. The assassin realized his psychological warfare had failed. Deculin glared down at the pathetic killer. He displayed the true majesty of a high-ranking aristocrat. He tightened the grip of his telekinetic control. Deculin bound the assassin and threw him to the dirt. He ordered the man to stay still and accept his arrest. The title card displayed the chapter number. Inspector Ropa arrived and saluted the professor. Ropa praised the professor's combat skills. He asked if he should beat the captive further. Deculin ordered the inspector to leave the man alone. He manipulated the steel wire to secure the prisoner. Deculin explained that standard magic handcuffs would be useless against the nullification trait. The inspector marveled at the use of physical steel wire instead. Deculin asked how the inspector had arrived with such speed. Ropa mentioned receiving an anonymous report about the commotion. Deculin realized someone else had orchestrated the ambush. Deculin walked away from the secured prisoner. He pondered the mysterious caller who tipped off the guards. He recognized the situation as a massive hidden variable. He looked up at the moon, relieved to avoid shedding blood. The next day, a summons was issued for the burst assembly. Deculin read the parchment in his training room. Ephorine stood near him, Ice having delivered the message. She questioned why he was examining the document while shirtless. The quest window prompted him to attend the assembly in a week. Ephorine offered to secure a mercenary guard for the trip. Deculin refused the offer without hesitation. He claimed a common mercenary would be useless. Deculin declined, knowing her choices would be inadequate. He knew the journey to the high mountains was fatal. He accepted the harsh reality of the coming trial. Ephorine scowled at his arrogant dismissal. She muttered that she didn't want him dying before she surpassed him. Deculin promised to handle the guard detail himself. At the Freyheim Order's training grounds, knights sparred with intense vigor. The commander praised his soldiers for their dedication. He instructed them to maintain their focus. He expressed doubt about accepting a new commission. Varan watched the drills with a dark expression. He urged his commander to accept the job despite his reservations. The commander explained the details of the massive escort mission. He admitted he hesitated due to Deculin's involvement. His commander informed him of a massive commission to guard Deculin's train. Varan tightened his grip on his sword hilt. The commander advised accepting the job for the financial reward. He reasoned that guarding an entire train would dilute the risk. Varan agreed with the tactical assessment. He offered to handle the assignment in person. He promised to relay the details to their captain. Varan's eyes narrowed with a sinister gleam. Berkt was the isolated dwelling of the continent's most powerful elders. The massive fortress served as a neutral ground for the magical elite. Attending the rare assembly was a mark of absolute prestige. He knew the summons elevated a mage's status to unprecedented heights, but the summons also triggered a deadly trial. Deculin prepared himself for the inevitable violence. Deculin arrived at the train platform with Alan in tow. He confirmed that his preparations were complete. Varan greeted him as his assigned escort. He thanked the professor for trusting his order. Varan assured him that the Freyheim Knights would ensure a comfortable trip. He promised to guard the first half of the train. Ephorine noticed the tension between the men. She questioned why Julie was absent from the escort detail. She wondered what kind of expression she should make around the professor, so she forced a bright smile to hide her immense anxiety. Deculin used his enhanced eyesight to inspect the knight. Varan formally introduced himself to the professor. He claimed he was dispatched to show respect to the Euclid household. The commander vouched for Varan's exceptional skill. He sensed no hostile energy and assumed his preparations were sufficient. Varan promised to take charge of the assigned cabin. Deculin thanked the man for his service. The massive steam locomotive began its journey through the snowy mountains. Varan walked toward his designated post. He cast a final, dark look at the professor. Ephorine shivered from the sudden drop in temperature. She wondered why the professor was acting so strange. The title card marked the beginning of the perilous journey. The train blasted steam into the frozen sky. The train rattled along the elevated tracks. Deculin told Alan to rest during the long ride. Deculin sat in his cabin while Alan slept nearby. He remembered the fatal reputation of the Berkt summons. The journey was notorious for claiming the lives of ambitious mages. The professor mentally reviewed the infamous train attack scenario. In the game, players had to guess which train would be attacked. Purchasing information from the black market was the standard strategy. He had severed his dark connections, losing the chance to buy safe passages passage. He accepted that he could not rely on the original villain's network. He remembered executing the criminals connected to his past. Instead, he relied on his enhanced attributes and physical martial arts. He watched his assistant sleep soundly through the tense journey. He recalled asking Alan to join him on the dangerous trip. He was surprised the boy had accepted, despite the known risks. He wondered if Alan harbored hidden ambitions. The train surged forward over the massive stone bridge. Declan remained hyper-aware of his surroundings. He had used Midas Touch to grant a massive boost to the defensive stats of his clothing. He inspected the glowing wood-steel shard resting by the window. He also imbued his wood-steel shurikens with lethal force. He even applied the enhancements to Alan's clothes. He exhaled a weary breath. The intense preparations had drained his mana reserves to near zero. He hoped the extreme measures would prove unnecessary. He closed his eyes, hoping for a peaceful trip. The sun blinded the snowy landscape outside the window. A massive explosion detonated beneath the locomotive. The blast shattered the tracks and sent the cars airborne. A group of masked assassins descended on the falling train. Deculane's cabin was ripped apart by the shockwave. Alan panicked as the floor gave way beneath them. The train plummeted toward the frozen gorge. Deculane maintained his composure amidst the chaos. He used his elementary telekinesis to stabilize their descent. Masked killers landed on the exterior of the falling cars. They smashed through the windows to slaughter the passengers. Deculane blocked a lethal strike aimed at his neck. Veron rushed in and urged the professor to seek shelter. Deculane stood before the shattered wall of his cabin. He launched his wood-steel shards to repel the invaders. The assassins warned that everyone present would die, but Deculane sat on a ruined couch, panting from exhaustion. The constant use of telekinesis dropped his mana to 10 points. Veron approached him from the shadows. The knight's eyes glowed with unmistakable murderous intent. He ignited his blade with a dark, blazing aura. Veron drew his weapon back for a fatal strike. He declared that it was Deculane's turn to die. Deculane asked if Julie had ordered the assassination. Veron furiously forbade him from speaking her name. He claimed he was executing the villain for his master's sake. Deculane realized Veron was acting on his own twisted devotion. Veron lunged forward with a lethal slash. Deculane severed his telekinetic grip on the train car. The sudden shift in gravity threw Veron off balance. The title card displayed the continuation of his survival. Elsewhere, Sylvia stood in an empty classroom. She held a pristine mana stone in her hands. She utilized the 3 primary colors of magic to shape the energy. A brilliant, glowing bird manifested from her palms. Sylvia held the glowing bird shaped from pure mana. She commanded the construct to fly and show her the area. The bird soared over the ruined ceiling of the train car. Deculane panted hard as he struggled to maintain his footing. The derailed carriage hung over the snowy cliff. He gripped his chest to endure his broken bones. Veron charged forward with a blazing red aura. The knight slashed his blade against the professor's telekinetic defenses. Deculane gritted his teeth against the massive impact. Veron swung his heavy coat as he pushed the assault. The red energy began to crack the invisible barrier. Veron sliced through the defensive field with sheer force. Deculane staggered backward from the violent clash. He realized the knight was far stronger than his current state. Even in peak condition, defeating the man would be impossible. He relied on his rare mental artifact to resist the intense pressure. Veron raised his sword for a decisive blow. Deculane summoned a shield of wood-steel shards to block the strike. The knight's furious expression remained locked on his target. The heavy blade shattered the floating shards. Deculane realized his resources were drained to zero. Veron drove his weapon downward with lethal intent. Deculane wondered if his life would end if the blade struck him. Blood sprayed across the ruined chandelier. The chapter title marked the climax of the villain's survival. Veron's sword tore through the air. Deculane stared calm and steady at the descending edge. He activated a distortion in the ambient magic. The fabric of space wavered around the combatants. Veron gasped as his footing vanished. Blood erupted as the shifting gravity caught the knight off guard. A severed hand holding a blade hit the wooden floor. Veron screamed in pure agony from the dismemberment. Deculane watched his mana pool drop to near zero. The knight slipped backward toward the the open void. He crashed through the debris of the ruined cabin. Veron tumbled out of the shattered wall. He scrambled to grab the edge of the jagged metal. A dagger lodged into the floorboards to anchor his grip. Deculin stepped forward to loom over the defeated assassin. A prompt announced the next phase of his desperate trial. The fierce wind whipped around the dangling knight. Veron glared up at the professor with absolute hatred. Deculin demanded to know the reason for the assassination attempt. Veron stated that he recalled the evil deeds committed against his liege. Deculin asked if the knight was acting on Julie's orders. He pointed out that his fiancée had never asked for this execution. Veron declared that the corrupt noble would never understand his devotion. In a fleeting memory, Veron recalled meeting Julie during a mission. He remembered how she had brought him into her night order. He thought back to the days when bullies targeted him. Julie had chased the thugs away to protect the isolated trainee. She commended the boy for his pride, despite the mockery. She offered to take him to the authorities herself. Veron recalled her fierce determination to stop injustice. He had screamed that he was just defending himself. Julie told him that he still had no right to hit people. She smiled and offered to teach him how to control his anger. That moment had sparked his lifelong dedication to her cause. He joined her night order to serve by her side. She was the one person who had ever taken care of him. She asked if he was having a hard time adjusting. He remembered how she always stood at the forefront to protect the innocent. Her unwavering justice had earned his absolute respect. His loyalty had blossomed into a silent devotion. In the present, Veron's grip began to slip. He knew his emotions were a burden to his noble liege. He spat that Deculin would bring about Julie's destruction in the future. Deculin agreed with the grim assessment of his original fate. He resolved to change the dark ending written for his character. He refused to let his story end in ruin. Deculin reached out and grabbed Veron's wrist. He ordered the stubborn knight to hold on. Deculin swore that he would never bring harm to Julie. Veron stared at the hand gripping his own. The knight refused to change his mind. He called the professor a fool for showing mercy. Veron forced his arm out of the professor's grasp. The knight slipped free from the anchoring dagger. He fell backward into the dark canyon. Deculin watched the loyal soldier disappear into the freezing mist. He remained silent as the wind howled around the ruined train. A search party gathered at the snowy crash site. The guards escorted the surviving passengers away from the debris. The survivors huddled together near the cliff edge. A glowing bird observed the wreckage from the sky. The massive train hung suspended over the frozen abyss. The rescue team stood baffled by the impossible sight. The title card displayed the next phase of his survival. The magical bird continued its silent observation. Sylvia watched the aftermath through her magical construct. She deduced that Deculin had killed his escort during the chaos. She corrected herself to acknowledge the knight had attacked first. Her own guard approached and suggested they return to the assembly. Sylvia turned away from the freezing wind. She wondered if the professor would make it to the meeting on time. Lilia Fremien, the vice chief of the security bureau, oversaw the investigation. A guard reported the details of the explosion and the subsequent attack. Lilia noted that such ambushes were common during the Bercht summons. The officer confirmed that Deculin and his guard were still missing. He gestured toward a young boy sitting by the rocks. Lilia recognized the survivor as the professor's assistant. Manalin explained that the entire train had been suspended in midair. He handed her a photograph of the floating carriages as proof. Lilia stared at the impossible image in absolute disbelief. She realized the professor had used an immense amount of magic to save the passengers. She knew that executing such a feat required legendary power. Her communicator beeped with an incoming telepathic message. She turned her attention toward the edge of the camp. Heavy footsteps crunched through the deep snow. A lone figure approached the gathered officers. Deculin walked into the light with a battered and exhausted appearance. He staggered a bit but maintained his upright posture. His sharp eyes scanned the rescue team. Alan rushed forward to greet his surviving mentor. Lilia introduced herself to the noble. Amr Deculin asked her for the current time. He calculated that he had just 6 hours left to reach his destination. Lilia asked if the train was his sole method of travel. He dismissed her concern by noting the alternate road and sea routes. She pressed him for details regarding his missing knight. Before he could answer, a gust of wind swept across the tracks. The guards watched in shock as the professor vanished from his spot. They speculated that he had used high-tier acceleration magic. Lilia marveled at the sheer volume of mana required for his constant casting. That night, the Grand Bercht Assembly convened in a massive hall. The clock clock approached the designated hour of the gathering. A glowing phantom manifested at the front of the chamber to lead the session. The most powerful elders of the magical world sat around the circular table. They sat around the glowing magical table to discuss the continent's future. The speaker declared that it was time to begin the roll call. The speaker called attendance for the distinguished family heads. He called out Deculane's name to the silent room. He warned that the Eucline family would face elimination for a missed summons. Sylvia listened to the harsh ultimatum with growing anxiety. The other mages mocked the Eucline family's recent lack of achievements. They gossiped about his unremarkable talents and his arrogant behavior. A glowing skull emblem watched over the judgmental crowd. The elders snickered at the thought of his impending disgrace. The heavy chamber doors creaked open. The mages turned their heads in surprise at the late interruption. Deculain stepped inside and announced his arrival. Sylvia let out a soft sigh of relief upon seeing his face. He walked toward his designated seat with absolute dignity. The chapter title marked the beginning of the crucial meeting. The assembly commenced with a rigid atmosphere. The first matter addressed the demon sighting in the Black Mountain. Ethansel suggested dispatching mages to cooperate with the church. The speaker agreed and called for a short recess. Deculain slumped in his chair, hiding his immense exhaustion. He relied on his traits to maintain a flawless exterior. His students assumed he was fine, despite his pale face. Alan rushed over to check on his weary professor. Deculain assured the boy that he was in good condition. He noticed a strange shift in his own perception of the assistant. He questioned his own reasoning for protecting the child. He recalled a famous movie quote regarding the nature of enemies. He realized that keeping a potential threat nearby was a strategic advantage. Deculain resolved to keep the boy close to uncover his true identity. He swore to discover the truth behind the assistant's hidden potential. The title card marked the start of the next chapter. The meeting resumed with a heavy tension settling over the room. The speaker introduced the topic of the rogue bloodshroud sorcerer. Vethan slammed his fist on the table in pure rage. The volatile topic soured the mood of the room. He demanded that the Imperial Magic Tower eradicate the hiding species. Ethansel argued that they lacked the means to identify the bloodshrouds. She insisted that they needed a solid clue to identify the race's features. Vethan insisted that the criminals possessed a secret leader. Ethansel accused him of relying on baseless speculation. The argument escalated into a bitter shouting match. Vethan yelled that countless mages had died due to past indecisiveness. Deculain stood up from his chair to interrupt the debate. The room fell silent as the notorious professor took the floor. He offered his own perspective on the historical conflict. He pointed out his family's long history of hunting actual demons. He stated that suppressing the bloodshrouds would lead to more misfortune. He argued that the true enemy of the world lay elsewhere. He stood under the harsh light of the glowing emblem. He acknowledged that the bloodshrouds were once considered enemies. He reminded them that the ancient massacres stemmed from a tragic misunderstanding. He explained that the historical slaughter was built on lies. Vethan glared at the man, appalled by his leniency. Deculain met his gaze with absolute calm. He recalled the innocent victims of the Rodran witch incident. He explained how the ensuing suppression sparked a cycle of endless bloodshed. He declared that the recent territorial disputes were driven by politics. Vethan insisted that the race was born with demonic energy. Deculain corrected him, stating that the bloodshrouds were humans with unique traits. Vethan screamed that the professor was defending actual demons. Ethansel listened to the professor's bold declaration. Deculain pointed out the hypocrisy of their blind hatred. Deculain warned that those who without thought condemned others were the true monsters. The contentious meeting was postponed to the following day. Deculain returned to his hotel room and patted his assistant's head. That evening, Deculain instructed his assistant to rest. He warned Alan to read the hotel regulations and stay in bed. Alan promised to behave as the professor left for his own quarters. Later that night, the boy woke up in the dark room. He rubbed his eyes, feeling a strong thirst. He grabbed a glass of water from the table. He stepped out of bed and found the room morphed into an endless hallway. The terrifying distortion stretched into the dark unknown. A system warning flashed across his vision. He remembered the rules warning against leaving the bed until morning. He realized his mistake had triggered a dangerous magical phenomenon. A terrifying aura flooded the distorted space around him. He scrambled backward as a dark presence loomed in the shadows. He spotted the imposing doors of the hotel rising before him. Another rule commanded him not to climb any stairs. He told himself not to panic in the face of the illusion. A heavy knocking echoed against the wooden door. He remembered the rule forbidding him from responding to the noise. He banged on the wood, pleading for someone to help him. A bright light pierced the darkness as the door swung open. Deculane stepped through the threshold to rescue his assistant. Alan stared at his savior with tears in his eyes. He ushered the frightened boy into the safety of his own room. The title card marked the start of the new chapter. He scolded his assistant for failing to read the safety regulations. He explained that the dense mana in Bercht caused spirits to manifest at night. He noted that many spirits lost their consciousness to the ambient magic. He guessed that his unique traits allowed him to open the door. A demonic skull materialized from the shadows behind the professor. The spirit roared as it charged toward the pair. Deculane told the boy to stay still. He launched a piece of wood steel to intercept the spirit. The purified fragment obliterated the ghost in an instant. Alan marveled at the professor's clean defense. He explained that his specialized magic was designed for killing. He demonstrated a spell utilizing flowing fire to change the subject. Deculane agreed that his destructive magic was nothing to be proud of. He shaped the flames into crackling lightning and solid metal. He manifested a brilliant green goblin fire to showcase his control. Alan pouted, or annoyed that the professor ignored his own effort. Deculane decided to offer a genuine critique. He pointed out a slight instability in the boy's air magic circle. He explained that the flaw made the entire spell unstable. Alan asked how he could fix the weakness. He told his assistant to figure out his own flaws. The boy realized the professor was treating him like a true student. Deculane told him to take his progress one step at a time. He noted that time was always on the boy's side. Deculane recognized that the boy possessed a world-class magical talent. He knew the child's potential was massive. He knew the child was fated to become an archmage. Alan stared at his mentor with wide, grateful eyes. The boy felt genuine warmth from the strict but sincere guidance. He returned to his bed and slept through the night. Deculane stayed awake to study a complex grimoire by the fire. The next morning, he walked along the remote mountain path. His wealthy magnate trait alerted him to a valuable item. He spotted a strange energy radiating from the frozen ground. A massive, dark crystal hovered above the earth. He used his telekinesis to uncover the hidden artifact. He discovered a rare fragment of a mana tree struck by lightning. He reached out to inspect the valuable material. His comprehension skill analyzed the raw magical properties. He smirked, knowing he had found something extraordinary. He used his telekinesis to sever the fragment from the source. He pulled a heavy block of purified wood from the dirt. The system identified the item as a fragment of a mana tree. He decided to use the exceptional material to craft a powerful new wand. He knew the weapon would accelerate his magical growth. The chapter title marked the continuation of his Bercht journey. During the resumed assembly, Vathan accused Deculane of siding with the enemy. He yelled that the Euclean head was betraying his own human lineage. The other elders murmured about his strange defense of the enemy. They wondered what ulterior motive he was scheming. Sylvia watched the argument, knowing the others were wrong about him. Deculane dismissed the man's aggressive rhetoric as obvious nonsense. The speaker ordered Vathan to stand down and end the argument. The speaker declared that a conclusion would not be reached today. After the meeting concluded, Deculane walked out of the grand hall. He accepted his growing estrangement from the other nobles for the sake of his main quest. He headed down into the bustling Bercht shopping district. He entered a quiet antique shop filled with magical artifacts. He visited a famous craftsman's shop to commission his new weapon. He wondered what materials would best complement his new mana tree fragment. Alan bumped into him, staring out the window in surprise. Alan eagerly pointed out a familiar face across the room. He declared that the woman was the hero who had escorted him. Deculane recognized Lilia from the security bureau. The sky remained overcast as the snow fell over the city. The title card marked the next phase of his journey. He invited the officer to a meal to repay her for protecting his assistant. Lilia informed him that the investigation into the train attack had concluded. She confirmed that his escort guard had died during the ambush. The small group sat together in the elegant dining room. Deculane maintained a neutral expression at the news. In a separate flashback, Lilia interrogated the captured assassin, Lockhart. Lockhart sat bound in a dark interrogation room. Lilia demanded that he show her his true power. She ordered the prisoner to activate his magic nullification. Lockhart unleashed his purple energy to prove his identity. The eye flared with intense magical energy. Lilia scolded him for his rash murders. She warned that killing innocent mages would ruin their chance at peace. She demanded to know why he had provoked the dangerous Eucline family. She explained that Deculane's defense of their race presented a unique opportunity opportunity. She remembered Dekulin's unwavering gaze as he defended their kind. Lockhart sneered, eye reminding her of the Eucline's history of slaughter. Lilia ordered the assassin to lay low in prison and wait for the Emperor's succession. She told him to avoid ruining their progress. Back at the restaurant, Dekulane noticed the distinct smell of alcohol on her breath. Lilia stated that she had nothing more to say regarding the incident. Lilia fell silent, annoyed by the man's arrogant tone. Helm approached their table with a smug grin. The chapter card marked the conclusion of the burst arc. Alan glared at the smug mage in confusion. Lilia sighed and accepted her dismissal. Lilia excused herself to avoid the arrogant mage. Helm took her seat, ignoring the assistant. Helm sat down and asked why Dekulin was siding with the blood shrouds. He admitted he was caught off guard by the meeting's events. He wondered why Dekulane was being so cautious. He pointed out the professor's sudden shift in political stance. He reminded Dekulane of his past academic paper condemning the race. He mocked the professor, asking if he had found a blood shroud slave. Alan yelled at the man for his insolent behavior. Dekulin wiped his mouth and insulted Helm's intelligence. Helm scoffed, but accepted the harsh rebuke. He reminded Dekulin that the presentation evaluation was only months away. Lilia listened from outside, finding it hard to believe Dekulane had changed. The chapter title introduced the aftermath of the Burkt Assembly. Dekulane finalized his commission with the Master Craftsman before leaving. The system confirmed the successful completion of a hidden side quest. He boarded the return train to the Empire alongside Vethan. The angry noble glared at him with undisguised hostility. Vethan fumed in silence for the entire duration of the ride. The train arrived at the grand station of the Imperial capital. The passengers disembarked onto the busy platform. Alan stretched his arms, relieved to stretch his legs. He noted that they still had one more transfer left. Dekulane stopped walking, noticing a familiar presence. Dekulane spotted Julie waiting for him near the arrival platform. She expressed her relief at seeing him return safe. She lowered her head, troubled by the recent news. Dekulane noticed the other knights glaring at him. She mentioned reading the news about him saving the victims with his guard. Julie mentioned the reports of him saving the victims. She hesitated before asking about her knight's final moments. She looked up at him with desperate eyes. Dekulane remained silent, wrestling with his own conscience. Dekulane knew the truth of the betrayal would shatter her ironclad conviction. He recalled Veron's final attack as the train fell. He knew he couldn't bring himself to confess the terrible truth. He worried that the reality was too cruel for the honorable knight. He refused to let her blame herself for her subordinate's sins. He chose to lie, claiming he lost a reliable ally during the fight. Julie's knights grumbled at the dismissive answer. Julie lowered her head to hide her sorrow. Dekulane maintained his cold facade despite his inner turmoil. She bowed to thank him for his efforts and walked away. Dekulane watched her leave with a heavy heart. He cursed his own lingering emotions regarding the doomed relationship. Alan muttered that the knights were being incredibly rude. Alan complained about the rude behavior of the other nobles. Dekulane told him to ignore their foolishness. He handed his assistant a wrapped gift to reward his hard work. The boy accepted the heavy grimoire with a surprised gasp. Dekulane told him to study the contents carefully. Dekulane pushed down his exhaustion, eager to return home and rest. They boarded a carriage to head back to the university. The train chugged along the massive stone bridge toward the university. The system recapped his survival through the consecutive ambushes. During the first ambush, the professor had controlled the situation. He had stood alongside the rescue team to secure the survivors. The second ambush had sent the carriages tumbling into the void. He lamented the loss of his loyal guard despite the miraculous escape. Dekulane closed his eyes, regretting the unavoidable casualty. The title card introduced the next chapter of his story. The chapter title shifted the focus back to his daily life. The grand estate stood quiet against the winter chill. Back at the manor, Yahello screamed at him for writing a massive check. She grabbed his collar, furious over his reckless spending. She yelled that their family's finances would only last another 2 months. She pointed at the decorative shield and vases cluttering the hall. She pointed at the expensive antiques he had purchased at the auction. Dekulane calmly asked her to act more like a noble lady. Yahello screamed that he was the one causing their bankruptcy. He admitted he hadn't understood the reason for his purchases at first. He thought they were art investments for the future. Dekulane realized the items radiated the hidden energy of his wealthy magnate trait. He now realized realized they possessed immense hidden value. He activated his Midas touch to awaken the potential of a porcelain vase. Yahello called him a moron for staring blankly at the air. Dekulin ignored her insult and focused his mana. He ordered his staff to appraise the newly enhanced artifacts. He ordered his butler to handle the artifacts with extreme care. Yahello watched in shock as the vase glowed with renewed energy. The system confirmed the vase now possessed powerful fatigue recovery effects. Dekulin smiled, knowing the item was now too valuable to sell. He handed the vase to a servant for safekeeping. Yahello panicked, assuming he intended to ruin them completely. Yahello yelled in frustration as he left for work. The camera panned over the grand architecture of the Magic Academy. The sign for the University Magic Tower hung proudly on the wall. At the Magic Tower, the Magic Exploration Club held a meeting. Ephorine enjoyed a game of cards with her commoner friends. Ephorine bragged that she was exempt from cleaning duty for a week. Her friends laughed at her triumphant victory. She remembered how she had been despised for her commoner status. She recalled the constant harassment from the noble students. Even the professors had treated her with open disdain. She was grateful to have a safe haven. She cherished the peaceful atmosphere of her ordinary club. She assured her friends that they were just an ordinary club. The title card introduced the new chapter. Heavy footsteps approached the clubroom door. Professor Relin slammed the door open with a furious glare. The angry professor marched into the room alongside his peers. He demanded to know what pointless activities they were conducting. He demanded to know who authorized a club for low-class commoners. Ephorine stood her ground, stating they were an official club. Relin yelled that no professor would ever approve such a thing. Ephorine flinched as the arrogant professor targeted her. Ephorine recognized the man who had punished her in the past. Dekulin stepped out of the shadows to confront the angry man. He ordered her to avert her eyes and show some respect. The other nobles snickered at her distress. Relin demanded to know who had granted them permission. Dekulin stepped forward, his boots clicking against the floor. Ephorine stared in shock as her nemesis intervened. He stated that he had personally approved the student organization. Relin flinched as the head professor loomed over him. Relin froze under the head professor's intimidating presence. The title card displayed the continuation of the confrontation. Dekulin restated that he had allowed the club to form. He asked if the man dared to challenge his authority. Relin backed away from the imposing figure. He stammered that he hadn't meant to cause offense. Dekulin gestured toward the room's empty interior. Dekulin claimed he intended to upgrade the club's shabby furniture. Relin laughed nervously and quickly retreated from the room. He promised to replace the shabby decor with better items. Relin laughed with a stutter and retreated from the room. He muttered that the arrogant nobles were acting like cockroaches. Dekulin muttered that those akin to cockroaches would always act like them. He excused himself to prepare for his next lecture. He walked away, leaving the stunned students behind. Ephorine watched her rival walk away with utter confusion. The students gossiped about his recent trip to the assembly. They whispered about the crazy news regarding the floating train. The students gossiped about the crazy news regarding the floating train. Dekulin silenced the room and stepped up to the podium. Later, Dekulin stood before his class to discuss magic interference. He explained the concept of magic interference to the class. He announced that they would begin with a practical demonstration. He snapped his fingers to initiate the test. He scattered a handful of expensive magic stones across the desks. The glowing stones levitated into the air across the hall. He explained that each stone was worth a small fortune. He challenged the students to break his telekinetic hold on the gems. He slammed his hands down on the desk, bracing for the impact. He promised they could keep any stone they managed to snatch. He challenged them to break his control and take the prize. The students raised their hands, unleashing their mana against his hold. He wanted to test his beginner-level skill against a large group of debutantes. He remained curious to see how his raw telekinesis would fare. He noted that the academy housed the most talented prospects. Ephorine focused her mana, determined to claim the valuable prize. She refused to lose the valuable item. Her unique magic began to disrupt his invisible grip. She refused to lose the valuable item. Her unique magic began to disrupt his invisible grip. The other students groaned in pain as their spells backfired. The other students groaned and bled from their noses as their spells failed. Dekulin remained unfazed despite the massive collective effort. He was surprised that the debutantes couldn't break his simple spell. Ephorine pushed her magic to its absolute limit to pierce his defense. Ephorine gritted her teeth and poured more more energy into her cast. Deculain praised Sylvia for snagging her own stone. He asked if anyone else was capable of succeeding. The remaining students collapsed onto their desks in exhaustion. He realized that Ephorine was the only one still fighting. She successfully snatched a blue stone from his invisible grip. The rest of the class watched in awe as the lesson continued. The students groaned in heavy exhaustion. Deculain called for a break to let his class recover. The debutantes slumped over their desks in total defeat. A red-haired girl admitted she could not even budge his magic. Ephorine rested her head on the table with a blood-soaked nose. She stated that breaking his magic felt like shattering a solid wall. Sylvia listened to the conversation from her seat. The blonde noble wondered if the professor had lied to her during the test. Ephorine held her mana stone prize close to her face. Sylvia glared at the silver-haired girl with clear jealousy. The title card displayed the current chapter of the survival game. Deculain returned to the podium to resume his lecture. He explained the true concept of magic interference. He demonstrated how to visualize the core structure of a cast. He noted that the successful students grasped the core idea already. He stated that true interference required disrupting the opponent's spell. He warned that the technique possessed a major limitation. A mage needed to understand the opponent's magic circles first. He urged them to use the chance to learn the proper method. He projected a massive glowing diagram to demonstrate the theory. He challenged them to figure out the central circuit of his spell. He summoned his dark telekinetic energy to manipulate the construct. He showed them how to locate the central circuit of destructive magic. The debutantes scrambled to take notes on the advanced lesson. 2 hours of intense academic study passed. Deculain concluded the dense lecture for the day. He warned them to review the material before their upcoming midterms. He announced that an open, practical exam would take place beforehand. He bid his class farewell and stepped away from the podium. The heavy doors shut behind the departing head professor. The students gossiped about his abrupt departure. Ephorine stretched her arms high into the air. She felt a genuine sense of enlightenment regarding her studies. Her friends praised her for representing the commoners with grace. Beck approached the commoner with a hostile sneer. A red-haired student yelled at Beck to stop picking fights. Ephorine glared at the arrogant noble without backing down. Beck demanded to know how the commoner managed to secure second place. Ephorine scoffed, refusing to answer his bait. He accused her of bribing the instructors for her grade. Ephorine snapped her head up in pure shock. He claimed everyone knew she was receiving private lessons from Deculain. She insisted that she had never taken private lessons. She demanded that he explain his baseless accusation. Beck assumed the professor had given her the mana stone on purpose. He mocked her for having no family wealth to support her. Ephorine unleashed a burst of bright green magic in anger. She challenged the noble to repeat his insult. Beck reached for his own weapon to escalate the conflict. The red-haired girl grabbed Ephorine's arm to stop the fight. She warned her friend about facing another severe punishment. Ephorine remembered the professor's strict demand for cold logic. She lowered her hands to avoid a needless confrontation. She forced a smile and agreed to let the matter slide. Beck flinched as she maintained her composure. She offered to buy her friends something delicious to eat. The girls hurried out of the grand lecture hall together. Sylvia watched them leave with a blank expression. She remained conflicted about her own feelings toward the professor. She stepped out into the open courtyard. She spotted Deculain standing outside the building. She approached him to demand a private conversation. The title card introduced the next phase of the academic struggle. Sylvia stared at the professor in the quiet sunlight. She pondered the ridiculous rumors spreading through the tower. She asked him if the rumors of his tutoring were true. She yelled that their hostile relationship made the rumor absurd. She asked if he had called her out just to spout nonsense. She told him to stop picking fights with her. She pointed out that he had not stepped into a lab for 3 years. She mocked his inability to continue his father's research. She confronted him about his frequent visits to the research wing. She noted that he had cleaned the lab and brought new magical tools. She accused him of trying to steal her deceased father's work again. Deculain clenched his fist to endure the harsh accusation. He refused to validate her assumptions with an answer. He maintained his cold mask despite the stinging insult. Sylvia turned and walked away in quiet disappointment. She lowered her head, upset by his continued silence. She tightened her grip on the papers in her hand. Several days later, the debutantes gathered in an outdoor arena. They felt profound anxiety regarding the upcoming practical test. The students wondered what kind of trial awaited them. Beck stood with his group, eager to cause more trouble. Ephorine's friends advised her to ignore his provocations. Deculain stepped forward to address the massive crowd. He reminded them that this was their final practical before the midterms. He announced announced the start of the public practical exam. The students murmured among themselves, anticipating a fierce challenge. Beck bragged to his friends about his own superior magical prowess. He stated that they would battle each other in the arena. He explained that raw power was not the objective of this test. He instructed them to demonstrate magic combat using 3 forms of elemental energy. He stated that victory did not matter as long as they showcased their skills. Professor Relin stood nearby to supervise safety. The student matches commenced with intense magical exchanges. So 2 students squared off in the center of the ring. Dekulin watched their technique with sharp eyes. Explosions rocked the designated fighting area. A combatant was blasted back by the sheer force of the spell. Relin panicked while Dekulin observed the result in silence. Ephorine and her friends struggled to endure the intense heat. They managed to focus and cast their own defensive magic. Sylvia unleashed a massive fire spell to secure her victory. The noble students cheered at another commoner's defeat. They praised Sylvia's flawless elemental control. Deculaean called Beck forward for his turn in the arena. He instructed the noble to choose his opponent. The arrogant boy pointed his finger straight at Ephorine. The silver-haired girl stepped down to face him. Beck bragged that no one could tutor her here in secret. Ephorine glared at him, tired of his endless insults. She mocked his lame attempt to copy Deculin's elegant style. She raised her hand to manifest a blinding green aura. Beck charged forward with pure rage. He launched a massive wave of golden fire. The intense flames crashed against her position. Ephorine countered with her swirling wind energy. Her wind magic deflected the flames with perfect precision. The resulting shockwave launched Beck into the sky. He screamed as he plummeted back to earth. He crashed onto the stone floor in a pathetic heap. Deculaean declared the commoner the winner of the bout. The students muttered about the very short match. The professor noted that she had used just 1 elemental form. She complained that her opponent was too weak to require more effort. Annie Dekulin told her to choose a new opponent for a proper evaluation. She pointed her finger straight at the head professor. The surrounding students gasped at her insane challenge. Relin stepped forward to intervene in the madness. Sylvia watched the confrontation with keen interest. The students thought Ephorine had lost her mind. Ephorine declared that she was willing to look like a lunatic for a chance to fight him. Deculin stared down at the determined student. Relin ordered her to compose herself and stand down. Deculaean accepted her bold request without a moment of hesitation. He stated he would act as her opponent for the final match. He promised not to launch the first attack. He declared she would win if she managed to move him from his spot. Ephorine felt her heart race as she faced the daunting trial. She had yearned for this exact opportunity. She recognized this as a chance to measure the gap between them. She launched a rapid volley of wind spells. She visualized the man she vowed to defeat one day. She focused her absolute determination into her magic. She followed up with a blazing inferno of earth and fire. The massive elements collided to create a violent blast. Relin watched the massive dust explosion in pure shock. A glowing magical circle formed beneath her feet. Deculaean shattered her combined attack with a single gesture. The protective barrier burst into a shower of golden fragments. Deculaean stood firm, untouched by her relentless assault. The professor sent a barrage of energy strikes toward her. He noted that she had a habit of telegraphing her larger spells. He used mana interference to disrupt her casting. Ephorine dodged the magical assault with supreme agility. She braced herself for another devastating counterattack. She realized her magic circuit was unresponsive. Deculin informed her that he had disabled her casting ability. Ephorine charged forward to engage in physical combat. She threw a fierce punch at his chest. A powerful barrier repelled her physical strike. The heavy impact sent her skidding backward. Deculin praised her brilliant execution of a dust explosion. He noted that her rare talent allowed her to wield multiple elements. He identified her innate ability as the vessel trait. He realized the original Deculaean would have been unsettled by her potential. He announced the end of the public practical exam. Ephorine fell to her knees in pure exhaustion. She stared up at the impossible wall she still had to climb. The instructor ordered the debutantes to prepare for their midterms. The students muttered about Deculaean's surprising praise. They admitted that Ephorine's performance was quite impressive. Ephorine wondered if the professor had acknowledged her skill. Her friends rushed over to congratulate her on the spectacular fight. Meanwhile, a massive ship docked at a bustling port town. A young boy rushed down the wooden steps to greet the arrivals. Ganesha welcomed her returning mercenary crewmates. A young woman named Yuria stood beside the famous adventurer. A title card marked the debut of a crucial new character. Yuria possessed the body of an island girl girl in the game. A flashback revealed her arrival in the unfamiliar world. The original reality of Kim Woo-jin's ex-girlfriend had vanished without a trace. She had encountered Ganesha and her guild in the forest. She realized she was trapped inside the game she had helped create. She resolved to stick by the powerful adventurer to ensure her survival. Daekulin opened a secure package in his private office. A system prompt identified the item as Lokelok's Eucline Wand. The legendary weapon possessed the ability to store 500 mana points. It contained iron wood to enhance magic efficiency. The artifact even altered its color to match the user's outfit. The weapon was crafted to amplify the Eucline bloodline. Roy interrupted to announce that dinner was ready. Daekulin sat down to a massive feast of luxurious dishes. He questioned the bountiful spread despite their financial woes. His butler explained that the enhanced antiques had sold for a massive fortune. The auction had generated enough funds to secure the estate for years. The butler presented him with the massive stack of auction reports. The report detailed the massive profits gained from his brief intervention. Yeriel praised the meal, relieved by their newfound financial stability. Dekulayan scolded his sister for her improper table manners. Later, Dekulayan returned to his grand office to prepare for the midterms. He reviewed the past exam questions submitted by the original villain. He noted that the tests were quite difficult for debutantes. The original Dekulayan had designed them out of pure arrogance. He realized the villain had mistaken unfair difficulty for genuine superiority. Dekulayan vowed to submit questions that held true educational value. He wanted his students to feel a sense of pride upon finding the answers. He pulled out a fresh stack of specialized exam paper. He activated his comprehension trait to map out the magical formulas. He infused the perfect solutions into the enchanted parchment. Brilliant streams of elemental energy flowed into the paper. The questions were designed to manifest a beautiful illustration when solved. He handed the finalized exams to a junior professor. He felt an instinctive pang of jealousy from the original villain's ego. A mysterious woman in white appeared in a grand chamber. The elders sat in an ornate, dimly lit council room. A document detailed the upcoming Sorcerer Council meeting. Daekulen's recent defense of the heretics had shocked the entire assembly. Back at the tower, the professors gathered for their monthly meeting. Adeline, the chairwoman of the Magic Tower, led the session. So the young-looking mage was a powerful half-fairy. She listened to the endless gossip surrounding Daekulen. The staff whispered about his unexpected political shift. Daekulen arrived and dismissed the absurd rumors with his usual arrogance. The professors noticed Lady Luina sitting in the lounge. She was the rival who had resigned due to Daekulen's past schemes. The staff speculated that she returned to reclaim her high position. Adeline concluded the meeting and ordered the exams to be distributed. Daekulen set his cup down and left the room. Adeline noted that his submitted test was far too elegant. She suspected he had received outside help to create it. She plotted to test his actual knowledge during an upcoming event. The day of the midterm exam arrived at the university. The students gathered in the grand lecture hall. An instructor announced that the exam would take place over 10 days. The unprecedented duration of the test caught the debutantes off guard. He explained that they would take the test in assigned private rooms. The open book format allowed them to study, eat, and rest. Ephraim panicked at the daunting prospect of a marathon test. They knew Daekulen was famous for his bizarre and sadistic testing methods. The instructor added that a perfect score would earn a recommendation letter from the chief professor. The professor confirmed that such an accomplishment would secure their future. The students gasped, knowing the letter guaranteed a massive rank promotion. Ephraim muttered that a letter from her sworn enemy killed her motivation. She then realized she could use the letter to humiliate him. She vowed to get a perfect score just to throw it in his face. 4 days passed in grueling academic silence. Ephraim grabbed her hair in frustration as the difficulty spiked. She realized each question was harder than the last. However, she felt a profound sense of realization upon solving them. The joy of enlightenment kept her glued to her desk. She stepped out into the courtyard for a quick break. She felt exhausted, but proud of her steady progress. She knew the test was improving her foundation as a mage. She spotted Sylvia resting on a nearby bench. She asked her rival how many questions she had completed. Sylvia replied that she was currently on number 8. Ephraim flinched, shocked that the blonde was already ahead. She lied and claimed she was stuck on number 7. She hurried back to her room to resume the grueling test. The night sky enveloped the massive towers of the Magic University. In his office, Daekulen received a massive piece of intelligence. A hidden document revealed that Emperor Krabayim was in critical condition. The Emperor's death would shift the balance of power across the continent. The ensuing success succession war would plunge the world into pure chaos. Decoleon knew he had to navigate the upcoming crisis with absolute caution. The system displayed the next chapter of his dangerous progression. The 10th and final day of the exam arrived. Many students had dropped out, unable to handle the extreme difficulty. Those who remained discussed the brilliant test with absolute awe. Even the senior professors wanted to inspect the rumored questions. Ephraim and Sylvia were the only two attempting the final question. Ephraim pushed through her exhaustion with endless cups of coffee. A sudden burst of magical light illuminated a distant room. Decoleon sensed that someone had solved the final hurdle. He opened the door to inspect the final result. He congratulated Sylvia on completing the perfect score. The blonde noble stared at the beautiful, glowing illustration she had manifested. Bright colors swirled around the room in a stunning, magical display. Decoleon admired the masterpiece of his own creation. The beauty of the spell resonated with Kim Woo-jin's lost dream of becoming an artist. He praised Sylvia for executing the intricate design without a single flaw. Sylvia watched him leave, feeling a rare moment of genuine gratitude. Elsewhere, Ephraim stared at her incomplete test paper in despair. The instructor entered her room to announce that time was up. Ephraim forced a smile, accepting her unavoidable failure. The instructor praised her for reaching the final question alongside Sylvia. Ephraim admitted she was jealous of her rival's monstrous talent. However, the pure desire for knowledge overpowered her bitter disappointment. She decided to stay in the room and finish solving the question on her own. Decoleon stood outside the grand tower, observing the sunset. Ephraim walked out, exhausted but satisfied with her intense effort. She discovered a graffiti-covered door leading to her sparse dorm. She stared at the harsh reality of her isolated commoner life. Tears welled up in her eyes despite her academic triumph. Her friends jumped out from the bushes to surprise her. The red-haired girl declared it was time to unwind and celebrate. They dragged the crying silver-haired girl away for a warm meal. A few days later, the friends discussed the latest crazy news. Decoleon had been summoned to give a lecture at the floating island. The island was an independent zone floating high above the earth. The location was a sanctuary for those dedicated to pure magic. The most sincere mages gathered there to pursue absolute magic engineering. Decoleon's flawless exam paper had made him a massive, hot topic. He stood before the Grand Assembly to explain his test solutions. A system prompt awarded him 30 mana for initiating the event quest. He noted that the lecture fee was an astronomical 1 billion won. Decoleon introduced himself to the gathered academic elite. He began his 2-hour lecture on pure elemental formulas. Adeline sat in the front row, suspicious of his sudden brilliance. Luina McQueen sat nearby, glaring at her bitter aristocratic rival. Decoleon demonstrated his complex theories with smooth, visual fire magic. Adeline constantly interrupted to ask difficult questions. Decoleon answered every challenge while manifesting the required formulas with ease. He realized the chairwoman was trying to expose him as a fraud. He decided to entertain her deliberate test of his integrity. He projected a massive, linear central circuit to answer her final trap. Adeline gasped, amazed by the flawless magical execution. With 10 minutes left, Decoleon prepared to demonstrate the final exam question. Luina stood up and accused him of blatant plagiarism. She claimed the 8th question was stolen from a different source. Decoleon remained in perfect calm against the severe public allegation. He unleashed a massive, swirling tempest of green and gold magic. The breathtaking display illuminated the entire massive lecture hall. He asked Luina if the original display was enough to prove his ownership. The rival mage fell silent, unable to deny the sheer majesty of his spell. A prompt confirmed the successful completion of his lecture quest. Decoleon walked out of the hall, expecting more trouble soon. He spotted a familiar face waiting by the massive stained glass window. He greeted Charlotte, a former peer from his university days. She demanded to know why he was addressing her in such a casual tone. He ignored her hostility and asked about the safety of Princess Maho. He knew the upcoming succession war would put the princess in extreme peril. Maho was a vital named character destined to aid his survival in the late game. Her complicated bloodline made her a prime target for continuous assassination. Charlotte admitted she had fled to the Empire to keep the girl safe. She warned that the next emperor would not leave them alone for long. Dekulin tossed her a heavy pouch of holding. He stated he would act as her lifeline to protect the doomed princess. Charlotte stared at the dense magical item in pure disbelief. She realized the pouch contained an enormous amount of wealth. She looked up, but the professor had already vanished from the corridor. She returned to her private room where Manhwa was waiting in secret. She warned the princess that their political enemies would arrive in no time. The Manhwa smiled with warmth, trusting her loyal guard with her life. Charlotte presented the heavy trunk of money to the royal. She explained that they could use the massive funds to hire more escort mercenaries. She vowed to face any danger to ensure their safe return home. A sudden noise outside drew her attention to the open window. A masked assassin stood perched on the stone ledge. Back at his estate, Dekulin sat at his desk to review his documents. Yahello walked in, surprised to see him studying with intense focus. She mentioned the massive paycheck he received from the floating island lecture. He stated he wasn't going to give her a single coin of the money. Yahello changed the subject to an official request from the university. She explained that the debutantes wanted to visit their territory for a field trip. Dekulin refused the request in an instant. He stated that taking the students on such a trip was far too dangerous. Yahello frowned, annoyed by his sudden overprotective attitude. Dekulin ignored her complaints and stared out the dark window. He pulled out a glowing crystal ball to prepare for the inevitable attack. Charlotte held the glowing communication crystal near her face. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark room. She asked the professor for his assistance. Dekulin agreed to help while manipulating a floating block of magic. He noted that Princess Manhwa possessed only one safe route out of the empire. He named the Crevice Canyon as their destination. Charlotte remembered the canyon was infested with demonic energy. Dekulin stated they could not use an ordinary route to avoid death. He ordered the guard to trust his guidance. A system window displayed information about the Crevice Canyon. The text explained it was an independent area known as a demon lair. He explained it was the fastest way to reach the Uran Republic. He promised to guide the group through the treacherous path. Charlotte asked if he intended to come in person. She questioned his motive since there was no obvious gain for him. Dekulin claimed he wanted the princess to live so his family could benefit from her survival. He stated their arrangement was a strict deal. Charlotte asked when they would rendezvous. He told her to meet at the canyon entrance in 3 days. He warned that failing to arrive meant they had no right to live. Charlotte hoped he could back up his arrogant claims. 3 days later, the students gathered outside a massive building. The text introduced the state capital of Ukline Hidakine. Yahello asked her brother why he allowed the field trip. Dekulin explained the city was close to the Crevice Canyon. He asked his sister where the debutantes were staying. Yahello mentioned they booked a floor at the local romance hotel. In a flashback, Dekulin gave a brief tour to the visiting students. He warned them that any mess in his territory would result in severe academic punishment. He used his unique traits to fire incompetent mages at the local tower. The skies turned to dusk as the students gathered around a large bonfire. Sylvia unleashed a massive pillar of water and magic into the sky. Brilliant fireworks exploded in the night air. The observing professors awarded Sylvia 10 points for the beautiful display. A red-haired girl complained about the surprise practical test. Ephraim agreed while holding a small firecracker. The professors called Ephraim's group up next. Ephraim began to explain her ductile and destruction magic before a shout interrupted her. She stared in pure confusion. Professor Relin ordered her to skip the boring explanation. Ephraim ignited her spell with a bright spark. A chaotic explosion of bright light erupted overhead. Her friends praised the visual effect. The professors gave mediocre scores of 6 and 4 due to the excessive noise. Ephraim's friends held her back to keep her calm. Dekulin interrupted to award her 10 points for her elemental balance. Ephraim stared in absolute shock at the perfect score. Under the moonlight, Dekulin prepared to leave on horseback. He pondered his upcoming mission as Ephraim approached his horse. He turned and demanded to know why the student was out in the dark. Ephraim asked why he treated her with kindness despite her father's past. Dekulin remained in strict silence. He told her to figure it out herself since she was an independent child. He rode away into the dark forest. Ephraim yelled that she would apply to be his subordinate. She vowed to uncover the truth about her father and surpass the head professor. She stood alone on the dirt path. The horse galloped through the rough terrain. Dekulin pondered his unknown past connection with Ephorine's father. He arrived at a dense barrier of demonic energy. He pulled out his crystal ball to check on Charlotte's party. Charlotte emerged from the trees to greet him. She guided Princess Maho and a male guard through the dark woods. The small group met the professor in the freezing canyon. Dekulin introduced himself as the top professor at the Imperial Magic Tower. He assured the princess that he would guide her through the escape route. He noted that the group looked battered from their journey. He handed Charlotte a letter from a hired adventure team. Charlotte read the document in pure silence. She expressed disgust at the contents and asked if their path was secure. Maho looked up with a worried expression. Charlotte announced they would begin their trek. Dekulin turned to face the upcoming threat. The group walked through the dense forest filled with glowing crystals. Maho asked Charlotte about the letter's contents. Charlotte explained that 37 assassins and Dianante were chasing them. The princess questioned the specific term. Charlotte explained the Dianantes were phantoms and demons that resisted normal attacks. She warned that the creatures presented a worse threat than the human assassins. Charlotte added that the Dianantes were products of a dark contract. She described how dark mages summoned them using human bodies. The Maho stared in pure terror at the grim explanation. A system prompt detailed the Euclean bloodline's power to exterminate demons. Dekulin navigated the treacherous path with confident strides. He noted the canyon was a fitting demon lair. Charlotte coughed with intense effort, struggling to breathe in the dense energy. Dekulin revealed the environment actually boosted his power. The demonic energy elevated his mana quality to rank 4. A text box explained the importance of mana quality ranks. It noted that rank 7 allowed one to become a proper mage or knight. The text highlighted that the most famous named characters held ranks 3 or 4. Dekulin felt confident he could kill the Dianantes with his elevated power. Charlotte asked if they could increase their pace. He scolded her for losing her judgment in a frantic rush. He warned that hurrying could cause fatal demonic energy poisoning. Charlotte flinched at the sound of rustling branches. She urged the princess to stay calm. She gripped her weapon to prepare for combat. Dekulin observed the loyal guard's warm heart. He knew Maho was just as nervous but hid it to spare her subordinate. Charlotte vowed to put her life on the line to protect the royal. Maho screamed and pointed toward the dark sky. A massive colony of demonic bats swarmed overhead. Charlotte drew her blade to face the inevitable fight. Dekulin stepped in front of the group to intercept the massive threat. He commanded his sharp wood steel fragments to strike. He sent a rapid volley of purified shards into the black swarm. The glowing blue projectiles tore through the cold air. The swarm took devastating damage in a blinding flash of magic. The magical strikes left bright trails of pure energy. Dead bats rained down around the stunned group. Dekulin ordered them to keep moving. He walked forward without a single scratch on his coat. The guards marveled at the professor's incredible destructive power. A monstrous roar echoed from the deep canyon shadows. Dekulin prepared his next spell without an ounce of hesitation. A massive ape-like demon screeched as it took a direct hit. The guards fought off small monsters approaching from the rear. Charlotte watched the professor handle the main threats with absolute ease. Dekulin refused to act like a polite gentleman in this brutal environment. He warned the group in advance of his lethal intentions. Charlotte stared at him in clear confusion. He glared into the dark woods with sharp eyes. An assassin praised the professor's excellent instincts. The masked man stepped out from the deep shadows. More assassins revealed themselves along the rocky cliffside. Dekulin ordered Charlotte to take the princess and run. He dismissed her hesitation, claiming he did not require any help. Charlotte spotted a dark mass forming behind the professor. A dark mage slammed his staff into the ground to cast a massive spell. A powerful shockwave blasted several assassins off the steep cliff. Dekulin readies his wand and asked Charlotte if she made her decision. Charlotte yelled for the princess to move. Maho pointed toward a terrifying figure emerging from the dust. Charlotte snapped her head around in pure panic. A giant humanoid shape materialized on the jagged rocks. The dark phantom radiated a lethal purple aura. Charlotte cursed the arrival of the Dianante. She stated she would stay to help him fight the monster. Dekulin ordered the stubborn guard to retreat. He assured her that there was no need made to feel guilty for leaving him. He explained she could help Eucline later when the princess gained political power. He summoned glowing wood-steel shards to serve as their escort. Charlotte bit her lip in bitter frustration. She grabbed Maho and sprinted away from the chaotic battlefield. The remaining assassins chased after the fleeing women. The Dianante mocked the arrogant mage for fighting alone. The demon leapt down from the high cliff edge. Deculain noted the creature's massive overconfidence. He infused his dark wand with pure, concentrated mana. The system confirmed his Midas touch trait enhanced the wood-steel weapons. He fired a heavy shard straight at the dark phantom. The glowing projectile struck the beast deep in the chest. A beam of concentrated magic pierced straight through the monster. The heavy impact shattered the rocky ground beneath the creature. The demon's eyes widened in pure shock. The purified steel tore the phantom's massive body into pieces. Deculain told the broken creature not to get ahead of itself. He summoned a dozen more glowing shards into the cold air. The relentless barrage sliced through the demon's remaining form. The surviving assassin watched the absolute slaughter in awe. A final massive shard drove into the heart of the demon. The phantom was obliterated into dark ash. A guard groaned in pain as the intense fight concluded. Mate Charlotte rushed over to check on the collapsed princess. She explained Maho was suffering from preliminary demonic energy poisoning. Maho looked up in mild surprise. Her great-uncle Guyland arrived to secure their rescue. He commended Charlotte for a job well done. He apologized for only being able to wait at the safe border. Charlotte stared at the minister in mild shock. She credited others for helping them secure their escape. She looked back toward the dark canyon entrance. She asked the minister to wait for the professor's safe return. Maho wondered if Deculain was truly all right. Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling immense, genuine gratitude. Gieland urged the princess to leave the cold area. The group began walking toward the secure Republican gates. Maho gasped and turned around with wide eyes. Deculain walked out of the canyon alongside a rescued guard. Maho ran to greet her surviving savior. Deculain announced he was heading back to the Empire. He dismissed their request for him to rest. Charlotte stared at his retreating back. She realized he put his life on the line to help them survive. She remembered his fierce battle against the deadly assassins. She called out his name to stop him. She expressed her genuine thanks for his heroic actions. She offered her hand in a gesture of pure gratitude. Deculain rejected the handshake due to her unwashed appearance. Charlotte fumed at the arrogant, noble insult. Maho waved and promised to repay the stern professor. Deculain turned away with a calm expression. He walked back into the dark forest alone. The system rewarded him with store currency and mana for completing the quest. Later, Charlotte entered the minister's private office. She bowed her head to Guyland. He told her to take a seat on the couch. She wondered if he planned to reject the princess's asylum request. She concluded he would have killed them at the border if he meant true harm. Gieland told her not to be shocked by his impending news. He urged her to listen until the very end. He revealed the Grand Duke wanted Maho to support his political bid. Charlotte stared blankly at the older man. She asked him to explain the absurd statement. She asked if Maho would become the new Grand Duchess. Gieland confirmed the Grand Duke could not trust his own grandson. He warned her that this information was highly confidential. A flashback showed Maho standing radiant in a formal royal dress. But Charlotte remembered worrying about the royals' survival during the fierce succession fight. She asked the minister if there was another person who knew the secret. Guyland denied it, claiming he just learned the truth himself. Charlotte sweated as she remembered Deculain's confident words. She recalled his claim that his territory could benefit from Maho gaining immense power. She realized the professor had predicted this massive political shift. She visualized him standing in the brilliant golden sunlight. She shuddered at the thought of his monstrous foresight. She smiled, glad that he remained a reliable ally. Back at the Grand Estate, Deculain slept in his massive bedroom. He woke up and realized he only slept for 2 hours. The sun had not even risen in the dark sky. The system explained his Iron Man trait melted away exhaustion. He stood up and tied his robe with a calm sigh. Despite the brutal battles in the canyon, his resilient body forced him awake. He decided to start his telekinesis training early in the morning. He stared blankly at the dark, quiet room. He sighed, wishing he had started his intense training earlier in life. A montage began showing his relentless daily routine. He lifted heavy weights to build his his physical stamina. He studied magical theory to pinpoint his academic weaknesses. He admitted Dekulin's elite personality traits made the grueling schedule possible. He reflected on his past life as Kim Woo-jin. A flashback showed his ex-girlfriend Yuria packing her bags to leave him forever. The original Woo-jin scratched his head in bitter regret. He believed she would have stayed if he had worked this hard in the real world. He pushed away his lingering regrets and focused on his ultimate survival. He noted that being awake for 22 hours a day was a long torment. Later, a steam train arrived at the busy Imperial station. The debutantes complained about their field trip ending so soon. A young boy pointed out the gathered mages to Ganesha's mercenary crew. Ganesha hid her face behind her large hat. Yuria told the adventurer she was acting highly suspicious. The transmigrator scanned the crowd with nervous purple eyes. She spotted Dekulin standing tall among the other nobles. She tried to hide from the man she used for her character design request. She worried if he had changed from his original villainous nature. She blushed, admitting he was incredibly handsome in person. She grabbed her young crewmate and turned to leave the platform. Dekulin heard someone say the name Leah in the loud crowd. He turned his head toward the departing adventurer crew. Yuria froze in pure, unadulterated terror. She sweated as the imposing man stared straight at her. Dekulin remembered his real-world girlfriend working by his side. He recalled the painful memory of her walking away from him. He remembered her tearful eyes during their final argument. He recalled holding her warm hand during happier times. He reminded himself that the girl before him was just a game character. He wondered why he felt a sudden wave of deep longing. He realized the girl's face looked exactly like his lost love. He muttered her real name to the empty air. Dekulin and Yuria stared at each other across the busy station. They locked eyes in a tense, unbroken silence. Yuria flinched as the tall professor stepped forward. Dekulin shook off his ridiculous real-world attachments. He turned away, deciding to ignore the strange physical resemblance. Ganesha dragged the nervous girl away from the massive crowd. Dekulin scolded a nearby student for eating while walking. Yuria peeked from behind a stone pillar, wondering if he had truly changed. She questioned if that strict man was actually the villain Dekulin. Several days later, a black limousine drove up to the Grand Imperial Palace. Yeriel trembled next to Dekulin in the back seat of the car. She complained about her immense fear regarding the new emperor. Dekulin handed her a document to calm her down. She asked what the sealed paper contained. He explained it was his strategic insight regarding the emperor's unique temperament. He knew helping Yeriel manage the territory would decrease future quest difficulties. Yeriel scoffed, accusing him of acting like a bizarre fortune teller. The Ukline siblings arrived at the grand outdoor ceremony. Dekulin stopped walking as a familiar figure approached him. Sylvia bowed her head respectfully to the strict head professor. He wondered if she was still grieving over her dead knight. A massive golden carriage rolled up to the long red carpet. The nobles knelt in deep respect for the royal arrival. A woman stepped out wearing elegant golden heels. The new emperor walked down the carpet in a flowing red dress. Dekulin lowered his head in silence as she passed his position. The bishop presented the royal crown to the young woman. He placed the heavy jeweled crown upon her bright red hair. Drums echoed across the courtyard to celebrate the historic crowning. The citizens cheered in joy for their new ruler. Emperor Sofian Yekatere, August von Gebrein, took her golden throne. She yawned loud and clear during her own coronation. The surrounding nobles sweated at her blatant display of boredom. A text box explained she was always bored due to her unrivaled status. The system revealed she possessed the greatest talent in the entire world. Her absolute perfection ruined her interest in anything mundane or ordinary. Dekulin felt a sharp gaze directed at his face. He looked up, sensing someone staring with intense focus. He wondered who was watching him during the massive ceremony. Sofian glared down at the professor from her high throne. Yeriel whispered that the emperor had been staring at him for a while. Dekulin met the ruler's intense red eyes without flinching. Sofian smirked at the stoic noble. Later, Sofian inspected a small chess piece in her private chamber. Chiron, her loyal guard, stood nearby in absolute silence. She mentioned that one person at the ceremony piqued her unique interest. She asked Chiron about a controversial question she posed in the past. The guard presented a document containing the written answer. Sofian smiled, revealing she recognized the creator of the flawless answer. Chiron noted that everyone knew Her Majesty. Sofian insisted Dekulin was sizing her up without an ounce of fear. She found his bold behavior incredibly amusing. She decided to tend to her imperial work. She told Chiron she wanted to abolish the unwritten rules of the Grand Palace. She smiled with a mischievous glint in her red eye. She declared her intention to participate in the Emperor's classes. Deculain walked through the busy university hallway with his usual grace. He noted that the debutantes were still acting stupid, despite the new term. He approached the faculty office, noticing a large crowd blocking the path. He asked why so many people were gathered at the wooden door. He spotted Chiron standing with fully armored Imperial Knights. He recognized the palace crest on their heavy armor. Deculain knelt as the guard presented an official Imperial decree. Chiron announced the high honor of sharing magic with the Emperor. He stated Deculain was a prime candidate for the instructional mage position. Deculain stared in shock at the sudden royal summons. Chiron commanded him to solve a question created by the palace mage George. Deculain wondered why the Emperor chose him for this unprecedented event. His interest was genuinely piqued by the sudden plot divergence. He knew Imperial quests always yielded incredible items and rewards. He hoped to figure out why Sophian was staring at him during the ceremony. Chiron offered him the chance to forfeit if he felt insufficient. Deculain confidently accepted the challenge and took the heavy scroll. Chiron nodded and left the university with his silent knights. Chiron assumed the professor would agonize over the complex problem for days. Deculain immediately projected the magical formula into the air with a snap. The glowing spirit of Mage George manifested from the open scroll. George stated he would judge the candidate based on the time taken to solve it. The spirit gasped in shock upon realizing the puzzle was already solved. Chiron stopped walking as he sensed the massive magical completion behind him. Deculain casually claimed he had been researching rune language recently. He secretly admitted he designed the difficult rune font himself as a game developer. He noted that his comprehension trait made the ancient problem entirely trivial. Chiron stared down at the professor in utter disbelief. He formally announced that Deculain had qualified for the examination. Deculain accepted the final result with a calm nod. Back at the palace, Sophian learned he solved it in 5 minutes. Chiron suggested they observe the remaining candidates longer. Sophian insisted his rapid solution was proof enough of his skill. She glared at her stubborn guard with cold eyes. She accused Chiron of supporting Mage Luina over Deculain. She pointed out Luina took 4 hours to solve the exact same problem. Chiron argued that Luina was a more flawless candidate due to the dark rumors surrounding Deculain. Sophian's eyes flared with sudden, intense anger. She commanded him not to speak of baseless rumors. Chiron bowed his head and accepted her final royal decision. Sophian yawned again and mentioned the injured knight examiner, Rugadin. She asked if they had found a suitable candidate to replace him. She smirked as a new idea came to her mind. She smiled brightly, amused by her own chaotic plan. She ordered Chiron to carry out her instructions at once. At the order of Freyheim training grounds, Julie swung her heavy sword. The other knights worried that their dedicated captain was pushing herself too hard. They assumed she was grieving the grim confirmation of Varen's death. A guard rushed onto the field, yelling for the captain. He panted hard as he reached the group. He informed Julie that she had been summoned by the palace. Julie's eyes widened in sheer surprise. She arrived at the Grand Palace courtyard. Chiron announced she was a candidate for the instructional knight position. He ordered her to pass the examination to prove her combat ability. Julie accepted the honor with fierce determination. Later, she walked through a massive blizzard toward a remote wooden lodge. She stepped inside the warm cabin to greet the other candidates. 3 elite knights sat around the roaring stone fireplace. A blonde knight welcomed her warmly to the lodge. They discussed the upcoming intense examination. A sacred star knight. Gwen warned that she would not go easy on anyone. Knight of Vigor Raphael agreed with a serious expression on his face. Julie noticed an empty chair at the front of the quiet room. Gwen wondered who would replace the injured examiner. The heavy wooden door creaked open in the cold wind. Julie turned her head toward the entrance. Elegant boots stepped onto the floorboards. Julie gasped in sheer terror at the arrival. Deculain entered the room and tipped his hat in a dark greeting. He introduced himself as the acting examiner for the knight selection. He maintained his cold, arrogant posture before the stunned warriors. Julie asked herself why a mage was leading a knight examination. She suspected he was plotting something sinister. Raphael demanded to know why Deculain was the examiner. The angry knight accused him of insulting their sacred duty. Deculain took a seat in the examiner's chair. He pointed out he was already the instructional mage and therefore qualified to evaluate them. Raphael sweated, unable to argue against a direct royal decree. The blonde knight asked if the exam would be fair since Deculain clearly favored his fiancée. Julie glared at the professor, knowing he would not favor her. Deculain told them to rest before the assessment began tomorrow. The knights headed to their rooms in tense silence. Deculain watched them leave, acknowledging the exam was rigged from the start. He noted that Her Majesty would make the final decision regardless of his evaluation. He smiled coldly to himself in the empty room. He vowed to fail Julie to keep her out of the palace. Outside, the freezing blizzard raged around the lodge. Deculain watched the knights spar in the snow the next morning. He observed their physical prowess from the window. He knew he lacked the martial knowledge to properly evaluate their swordplay. He accepted the outrageous offer solely to stop Julie from entering the palace. He remembered a dangerous death variable hidden deep in the palace basement. He knew Freyden's abyss was a cursed mirror that Julie must never encounter. He stared at the fierce knight swinging her sword in the snow. He announced the start of the first test to evaluate their persistence. He explained they must harvest rare magical fruits from the surrounding mountains. He projected holographic images of the requested items. He warned that the items must be brought back completely undamaged. He declared the 24-hour timer had started. A warm fire crackled in the hearth as time passed. The blizzard howled furiously across the jagged peaks. Julie searched the freezing cliffside for the rare ice flower. She noted that the transparent flower was incredibly difficult to harvest. She wondered if Deculain really came just to act as the examiner. She spotted a faint glow in the deep snow. The pristine ice flower stood untouched near the edge of the cliff. She smiled in relief upon finding her designated target. Later, she returned to the lodge and presented the frozen flower to Deculain. Deculain inspected the item with sharp eyes. He bluntly declared it damaged and failed her first attempt. Julie stared at the flower in complete shock. She noticed a tiny crack forming on the delicate petal. She cursed her own carelessness and vowed to bring another one. She turned around and marched back out into the cold. She found a second ice flower deep in the blizzard. She carefully snapped the stem to preserve the bloom. She smiled, exhausted but determined to pass. She slipped on the icy rocks and nearly fell. Back at the lodge, Deculain pointed out another crack in the second flower. The blonde knight ate his dinner, watching her fail again. Deculain reminded her she could only eat after completing the mission or giving up. He asked if she intended to quit. Julie refused to surrender and headed out for a third attempt. She trudged through the deep snow as the blizzard intensified. She spotted another glowing flower high on a jagged rock. She panted hard, reaching her absolute physical limit. She plucked the third flower from the ice. Deculain rejected the third attempt for being damaged. Julie screamed that it was impossible for it to be cracked. He showed her the tiny fracture on the crystal petal. She remembered checking it carefully outside the villa. She stared at the warm fireplace burning in the room. The heat radiated across the cozy cabin. She realized the ambient heat was cracking the fragile ice. She glared at the professor and declared she would make one last trip. She ran out the door before he could stop her. Deculain remained silent, knowing she figured out the trick. He hoped she would fail regardless. Inside, Gwen doubted Julie would return before the time limit expired. Julie kicked the door open, panting wildly. Deculain ordered her to bring the item forward. She yelled for him to come outside instead to prevent the heat from ruining it. She stood victorious in the freezing wind. She smirked, confident she had solved the puzzle. Deculain flatly refused to step outside. He reminded her he explicitly stated he would not move from his seat. He pointed out she agreed to the rules at the start of the exam. Julie gritted her teeth, realizing she was tricked from the beginning. She glared at him and vowed not to give up. She turned around and channeled her fierce energy. She slammed her hands onto the snowy ground. A massive wave of frost erupted from her position. Deculain watched in awe as her spell coated the entire villa in solid ice. She held up the perfectly preserved ice flower. She stepped forward to hand him the prize. Deculain inspected the flower and immediately declared it defective. He explained the delicate ice was also damaged by direct mana exposure. Julie stared at the shattered bloom in utter despair. Deculain formally eliminated her from the examination. Later, Julie slept deeply in her bed, having fainted from exhaustion. Deculain stood in the freezing hallway, unhappy with the cruel outcome. He recalled using his sharp eyesight trait to inspect her mana. A system prompt revealed she was suffering from severe internal mana damage. He deduced she had sustained a life-threatening injury in the past. The observing knights knights gossiped about the severe difficulty of the evaluation. They discussed how the trial was far too hard for Julie. The green-haired knight recalled their past escort duty and merit. He stated that Julie had sustained a previous injury because of Raphael. Raphael confirmed she seemed to be limiting her mana usage during their spars. Deculaean stood outside the wooden lodge in total silence. He ordered the remaining knights to return to their private rooms. The sun began to set over the freezing mountain peaks. Julie breathed with heavy effort in the freezing mountain air. Deculaean approached the silver-haired knight with a calm expression. He stated he had a task for her before sending her away. Julie admitted that failing to protect the item was her own oversight. Deculaean told her he wanted to ask her one final question. He clarified he was not asking out of a sense of duty as an examiner. He asked her to recall the promise he broke to her in the past. Julie stared at him with complete uncertainty. Deculaean remembered that the old promise was shattered a long time ago. He acknowledged that she still harbored deep hatred for him. He questioned his own motive for holding her back in the cold. He wondered if he was just making excuses to keep her nearby. Julie broke the tense silence. She explained that she received a letter from the Luna House in the past. She stated that she demanded an explanation from him regarding the severe allegations. She reminded him that he burned the letter right in front of her. She asked why he wanted to discuss the broken promise now. She turned her head away in lingering shame. She admitted that she was also at fault during that confrontation. She revealed that the research her father started was still ongoing. She vowed to apologize and help revive his household once the project succeeded. Deculaean listened to her explanation with a blank face. He acknowledged his past mistakes without making excuses. He called out her name in a soft tone. He declared he would try not to love her moving forward. Julie widened her eyes in pure shock. He suggested they go their separate ways to avoid burdening her further. He predicted they would drift apart on their own over time. He turned around and told her to be careful on her way back. Julie watched his dark cape flutter in the winter wind. She smiled at his unexpected change in demeanor. She wondered if the cruel professor was changing his ways. Deculaean observed her departure from an upstairs window. He questioned if his lingering feelings for her were unavoidable. The title card transitioned the story forward. 4 days passed as the initial evaluations reached their conclusion. Deculaean rejected all 4 knight candidates. A document confirmed his own appointment to the teaching mage position. He narrowed his eyes at a new piece of information. He sat alone in his massive, opulent study. The bright sun illuminated the grand ceiling of the imperial palace. Deculaean walked into the royal throne room with confident strides. He bowed his head before the new ruler. Emperor Sophian yawned in sheer boredom. The royal herald announced the arrival of Luina von Schulrat McQueen. Deculaean grimaced at the thought of working alongside his bitter rival. He noted their hostile relationship would make the new job exhausting. Luina adjusted her glasses and greeted him with a sharp glare. A flashback revealed the events of the professor promotion evaluations. The other faculty members gathered to support Luina's bid for head professor. She smiled with absolute confidence in her academic achievements. She competed in a fierce manner against Deculaean for the single open position. She believed she possessed superior research accomplishments. She noted that the other professors favored her over the arrogant noble. She assumed the prestigious head professor seat belonged to her. Dark clouds gathered over a grand, aristocratic estate. A panicked servant rushed through the hallway. Luina asked the rushing servant to explain the sudden commotion. The servant revealed that her father had suffered a serious magical injury. Luina learned that her business was on the verge of complete collapse. She realized Deculaean had orchestrated the string of misfortunes. She clenched her fist, determined not to yield to his vile tactics. Heavy rain poured over Deculaean's massive estate. Luina pleaded with him to spare her collapsing house. She fell to her knees in the cold downpour. She realized her bloodline lacked the power to escape his cruel grasp. She begged his guards to let her speak with the noble. Deculaean stepped out with an umbrella to confront the screaming woman. She promised to give up her promotion if he stopped ruining her life. Deculaean feigned ignorance regarding her desperate plea. He demanded she apologize for acting ungrateful despite his past support. Luina trembled with unbridled rage at his absurd demand. She realized giving up her dream would not end the nightmare. She collapsed onto the wet cobblestones in pure despair. She forced herself to apologize to protect her remaining relatives. She accepted the intense humiliation to save her bloodline. Dekulane stared down at her with a look of absolute disgust. He crushed her face into the muddy ground with his heavy boot. He insulted her lack of foundation and historical prestige. He ordered her to get lost and never show her face again. Luina knelt in the dirt with bruised knees. The torrential rain washed over her battered form. She cried bitter tears behind her cracked glasses. She vowed never to lose to him again. She promised to repay the humiliation 1,000 times over. The next day, rumors spread across the massive university campus. Ephraim overheard the students discussing a shocking new development. A student asked what had happened to cause such a massive stir. The students whispered that Duke Luina had vanished without a trace. A title card introduced the next chapter of the survival story. Dekulane projected a massive visual of a swirling mana disaster. He explained that natural disasters were just combinations of pure elements. He felt the sharp, suspicious stares of the entire faculty. He noted that teaching the clueless debutantes was much more comfortable for his peace of mind. He maintained his calm posture despite the growing tension. The following day, a visitor arrived at the Eucline estate. Deputy Director Lilia Fremien approached the grand entrance. She entered the study to speak with the head professor. She explained she was investigating Luina's sudden disappearance. She asked if he had any suspicious circumstances to report. Dekulane denied having any knowledge of the event. The investigator accepted his brief answer and departed the estate. Dekulane walked back into his private chambers with a dark expression. He clenched his fist, annoyed by the mounting suspicion against him. A glowing blue magic circle materialized on his desk. The magical message asked if he had abandoned his loyal followers. Dekulane realized the message came from his original dark network. He sensed a terrible premonition regarding their sudden contact. He wondered if his own secret subordinates had kidnapped his rival. His eyes widened as the grim realization took hold. The magical interface faded into the shadows. Dekulane stared into the quiet darkness of his empty room. He manifested a glowing blue illusion of a kneeling subordinate. He activated his magic to establish a secure link. He commanded the illusion to lead the way to their hideout. A title card displayed the current progression of his villainous fate. The setting sun cast long shadows over a rundown district. An old man coughed in the dirty alley. Dekulane observed the wretched poverty hidden within the imperial capital. He followed the glowing blue phantom through the desolate streets. The phantom guided him toward a heavy wooden door. He walked down a long, dark stone staircase. He entered a damp underground chamber. Two masked figures knelt on the floor to greet him. They bowed their heads in deep reverence. Dekulane asked them to repeat the exact orders they were following. The masked man claimed they were ordered to show no mercy if Luina entered the capital. Dekulane confirmed his dark network had executed the kidnapping in secret. He commanded them to take him straight to their captive. He followed them deeper into the underground prison. The damp stone walls offered no chance of escape. Luina sat bound to a wooden chair with a thick sack over her head. The subordinates revealed they had injected her with an anti-mana toxin. Dekulane pondered how to handle the massive catastrophic mess. He realized the villain's unavoidable fate was manifesting through her captivity. He searched his mind for a way to clear his name. One of the masked men handed him a thick stack of papers. Dekulane asked what the heavy ledger contained. He flipped through the document with sharp, focused eyes. His eyes widened in absolute shock at the written contents. He thanked the subordinates for providing the crucial information. He ordered the two assassins to leave the room. He declared his intention to speak with the captive without the guards. The subordinates bowed and prepared to exit the chamber. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them. Dekulane glared down at the bound woman. He reached out and grabbed the coarse fabric of the sack. He pulled the heavy bag off her battered face. Luina gasped as the sudden light hit her eyes. She screamed his name in a mix of terror and absolute fury. She asked what he planned to do after setting up such an elaborate trap. Dekulane warned her to choose her words with care. Luina struggled against her thick ropes. She groaned in pain. So unable to muster any magical energy, she accused him of holding a petty grudge from their past promotion battle. She glared at him with pure venom in her green eyes. She asked why he went through the trouble of kidnapping her. Dekulane stated that it was the one method left to handle the crisis. He maintained his cold, arrogant persona to hide his true intentions.